Leani Wiz-All-Tricks stood with her back to the door, desperately pouring as much of her mana into her spell, desperately hoping that her ritual would finish before a raider found her, desperately praying that the gods would allow her to complete her task and help her people turn the tide of this war. Then, the Magi Circle. She had drawn in her own blood, and with expensive resources whose cost would have collapsed other lesser nations, started to glow and glow, its light getting near blinding. She had done it. Her lifelong research and preparations, her appeal to the Queen, and her 3 long years of adventuring had paid off, and now a new powerful warrior will be brought to their nation. Its will subsumed into servitude to her family and, by extension, the Queen. Gifted with 3 boons to make their task simple, the spell she had invoked didn't let her pick where the person or thing she brought was from, but she narrowed the list to a set of qualities she wanted. Her people needed someone skilled in warfare, someone capable of matching or exceeding the ferocity of her enemies, someone that can speak and think so it could grasp and share its thoughts. And lastly, it must be from a race that could match or beat her enemies on a physical level. But as she watched the life form she had summoned take shape, a sharp and sudden pain ran through her core. Glancing down to see why she felt it, she saw the upper end of a Chiantic's longsword protruding out from her abdomen, letting out a gasp as her mind realized what had happened. She grit her teeth and kept her focus on the spell even as her eyes watered at the pain, and she heard the growling rumble of the Chiantic's behind her as it spoke. "What have you done, witch?" the Chiantic said as he pulled the blade free, making her fall to her knees as she no longer felt her legs. Leani kept focus. She needed a few more seconds and looked over her shoulder with a glare and a wide grin. "I have summoned something you can't beat. It will have more martial skill and greater strength than you, demon, and your empire's days will now be numbered. The spell can't be stopped now." The Chiantix reached up to one of his long horns that curled back and away from its face, rubbing at it like she would run her hand through her hair, and smiled a fanged smile at her. "I doubt that, sure. Your kind is skilled in magic, but you Chwal have always been fools. Our might can't be beaten," he said as he steps up next to her. "But I will let it arrive. I want to see your face break in despair when I cut it down." The form was complete as it was gifted its first boons she had placed, gifting it the equipment it believed was needed for warfare, but it was gifted clothes like that of a workman. Trousers, a tunic of multicolored splotches, hard boots of some kind, and cloth gloves of tough-looking fabric. Then it was equipped with some kind of harness that looked heavy. The front had a series of pouches and pockets, then a helmet that was no better than the guard kettle helm formed over its head. It was given a new harness around his hips, with some extension down the legs a bit, with more pockets and pouches all over its frame. Finally, a short war staff of some kind, along with what she believed to be some kind of weapon that slotted into a well-made holster on its right leg, its pouches filled with boxes of some kind that had finger-sized metal pieces inside. "You have failed, witch," the Chiantic said as he disregarded the new being in the room, but Leani noticed the being snap its head around to him as he spoke, her second boon clearly doing its job of allowing the creature to both understand the speech of this world and be understood. It let off a speech that was not guttural or too odd, clearly a defined language of the thinking creature, and she understood it had asked what had happened, a question as to its purpose, and Leani had her chance. "My people need your help. Please save me," she cried. Before the Chiantix raised his sword to cut her down, the creature raised its staff and did something as 2 quick claps of thunder rang, and the roar of fire came from the end of its preferred weapon. She shut her eyes and covered her ears at the sudden and deafening sound. But the sound followed by the clattering of a longsword on the ground. Opening her eyes, she looked over to where the Chiantix stood, but he just fell backward and slammed hard on the ground. The creature rushed over, looking at her wounds. It removed 2 packs from one pouch and ripped them open with its teeth, letting its weapon rest in a sling at its side. It spoke again, as it started to apply some kind of basic treatment to her wounds, and its words reformed in her mind as it asked her for information. "Who are you? What are you? How much blood can your kind lose? What can I do to help your people? Also, who was that?" She felt a bit off as the bandages it had placed were tight against her skin. She took the chance to study this entity she had summoned. It was a biped like most thinking races in this world, but it was very different. Its skin was tan and looked soft, with no scales or plates. Its eyes were a simple green, but had no mana coursing on the edges. She saw no fangs of sharp teeth as it spoke aside from two small canines, no claws or horns. But she had to answer, "I am Leani Wizaltrix, 16th princess of the Chiwelry Queendom, and I am a Chiwel, not a lot, but he may have a health potion in his pockets," she said back and pointed to the dead raider. "My nation is at war with his, and we are losing. We need you to turn the tide by acting as our elite warrior while training our soldiers. He is a Chiantix raider from the Chiantix Empire to our east, though he and his raiding hosts' attack on this settlement was not expected." The creature looked over and rummaged through the pouches of the dead raider, pulling out 3 vials and holding them out to her. She took one and drank as it spoke. "So, you summoned me to your world?" It seemed to think over the idea, then smiled wide. "Can't say I am too happy to be dragged out of my world, but seeing as I had stepped on explosive ward spell, I can't really complain. My name is Jason, Captain Jason Coleman, United States Rangers." It took to a crouch and raised its weapon, aiming for the door suddenly. "Just 'cause I am a bit of an unknown. Did you give me some crazy power or something?" It seemed to get ready to do something, but then shouted, "Cover your ears!" She did so quickly as she turned a bit while the potion did its job, and saw as he dispatched 5 more Chiantix that were rushing in. Each seemed to suddenly fall over as something poked holes into their armor or helmets at the same time as more thunderclaps rang. She stared in awe for a second. Then, as nothing else seemed to try to get in, she answered the creature's question. "Well, I did modify the spell to allow you to create any and all forms of weaponry and armor from your world," she said back, then looked up at it. The formerly calm and battle-ready visage it had given broke as its mind pieced together what she had said. Some kind of internal conflict over what she had done, maybe. Or perhaps it was in shock at the implications of her modifications. It turned its head slowly and looked at her. "What? All of them?" it asked in what she believed to be a shocked tone. And she nodded slowly, hoping the gesture was the same for his people, and noticed the creature grin like a devil hound while its eyes went wide before it spoke again. "This will be over sooner than I can train people, but I am here to stay. Tell me how his people are executing this war." Leani's natural instincts suddenly screamed to life that she had never felt before. This creature was like some monster to her primal mind, and she wasn't sure what would happen if she told it all that the Chiantix's different misdeeds throughout the war, and her blood felt cold as she spoke. "They have enslaved anyone they don't kill. If you are lucky, you will be sent to a farm to toil for the rest of your days. If not, you would pray that whichever house or master that buys you was on the calmer side of morality, as all you can look forward to is pain and torture. There are some reports of some in their mid to high classes even eating people alive, including children. They don't take prisoners if you stand against them. They just kill you. If you submit, they may treat you better. But you are still a slave. They have razed villages to the ground. I have been witness to a short truce that was signed, during which the general intentionally forced himself on a slave girl barely out of her childhood. They had also broken that treaty the same night when they tried to capture me and my sister. They use spells without discretion to those it will harm, actively poison water supplies, and have on more than one occasion launched full-on invasions into our neighbors' nations while wearing our equipment and heraldry." The creature's grin grew wider, then shifted to a calm that unsettled her. A look like it was some twisted and foul entity forged to kill and kill alone. And she questioned herself on if she had made a mistake as it changed its short staff for a different one that was attached to an oversized backpack by a long belt. As it got up and loudly declared, "Thank God Geneva is on Earth because now I don't need to hold back against them," before kicking the door open and activating whatever foul magic its weapons employed. The sound that followed haunted her even to this day. It was a short and sudden burst, followed by the sounds of small thunderclaps that turned whoever it pointed its weapon to into small piles of viscera. Brrt, brrt, brrt. Leani came out the now broken door to the village she had chosen to summon the creature called Jason in. Some of the buildings were burning, but the creature stood in the middle of the square, still holding that monstrous weapon in both hands, turning itself back and forth to face new Chiantics that came rushing it, using the weapon the second it turned. Killing them? No, obliterating the raiders the second they came around a corner. Every raider, even those carrying shields, was removed from this world to the sound of the weapon, and apparently, it had a name. The creature has started calling the weapon Millie the minigun. She watched as he suddenly turned to one wall and sprayed it, taking chunks out of the stone and wood with ease, before she saw 3 sets of raider bodies drop on the other side of it. And she cursed herself for bringing this monster here as she watched it switch its weapon as a short shower of arrows came from a building. The creature ducked behind the tall monument just off the center of the square and yelled out to the raiders. "Did you spare the people who lived in that house, you cowards?" It roared in question, only to get a second shower of arrows before it switched its weapon again, still some kind of staff. But the end of it was alit with a small flame. Then it reached into a pouch on the lower harness that she now recognized as a belt of some kind, retrieving a small cylinder. "If you don't want to die a worse fate than your friends send the Chihuel inside out, you have 5 seconds to comply." Leani wasn't sure what it was planning, but she used a basic detection spell and found no Chihuel inside. She shouted out to the creature, "It's just raiders inside! Kill them! That's an order!" She was stunned as the creature cocked an eyebrow at her, giving her pause before it spoke back. "Are you sure? I don't want to hurt your people." It called back, in clear defiance of the subjugation magic she had placed in the spell, but she nodded anyway. The creature looked a bit uncertain but shifted and stood up slowly, before tossing the small object towards the building, summoning a cloud of lingering fog where it had landed. Before he rushed into the summoned cloud, followed by gouts of flame and roars of fire shone through the smoke, like some salamander was in battle beyond it. As the fog cloud broke down the building, the last of the raiders were using as a refuge from the Millie weapon was an inferno of unprecedented scale. No part of it was not burning. It unsummoned its weapons, barring the one on his leg, placed its hands on its hip and took a deep inhale and sighed, "I love the smell of alchemist fire in the morning." It spoke with a note of humor and pity, before turning back to her, its eyes narrowing, and he stormed over in a quick march. "Care to explain that order business, princess?" it said in an agitated growl, its right hand coming to rest on the weapon it kept on its leg. Leani shrunk back and rushed over to the Magi circle, looking the formula over again. The spell was done right. It should not be able to counter her magic or even show aggression towards her. It should have followed her order when she told it to attack, but something was wrong. Her mind raced as she heard its boots make small thuds on the stone of this building. Taking a chance, she reached out what little mana she had, felt it sink into its form, and felt nothing in return, so the chance of it being magically more powerful than her was not the cause of this failure, which meant the only other reason was worse. She turned slow and stood up. The 3 potions she drank did their job and healed her completely. She faced the creature and noticed it towered about an inch over her, glowering at her, still agitated. The only reason the spell would still fail is because the world it came from has no mana at all, and its form can't use or be used by magic. This meant she had unwittingly summoned a monster that had access to an arsenal of weapons that couldn't be stopped or interfered with by magic. A monster that was stronger than the Chiantics, a monster that could in all likelihood destroy her world, and worse, she had pissed it off. She forced an apologetic smile and summoned her most calming voice. "I apologize. I forgot you are not my guard. I am used to ordering my guards by providing information. Thank you, Jason. You have saved this village, though I have a feeling the inhabitants will abandon it over trying to salvage the location," she said, her mind realizing that the only way to keep it cooperating with her is to appease it, and added warmly, "Know that your efforts here will be rewarded nevertheless." This Jason cocked its brow again, its face, if it used the same body language as hers, showing skepticism over her words. Its gaze still locked on her, but sighed, after a second, and removed the helmet, revealing the shock of pale blonde hair and rounded ears, running its hand through and over it a few times after tucking the helmet under its arm, before it looked back up and spoke. Okay, I don't really believe you, but you are the only point of information I have available to me, so answer some of my questions first. Then I'll make a final decision on whether or not I will help your nation. Normally, this would be handled by my superiors or my government, but I have a feeling that there are no other humans in your world. That word, human, that odd word that her mind summoned information on, and she remembered a race that had been here at the birth of life but was destroyed by the Xialdar a few short years after the creation of life, in the eons past, back at the calamitous formation of life, when the world had thousands of races, so the tales told. Is that what he was? A thought for later, she thought and smiled as she spoke. Of course, you must be curious about a lot of things. My world will clearly be different than yours. Great. First and foremost, the Chiantics are slavers. We have established that, but I must ask about your nation, too. Your nation doesn't deal in a slave trade, right? It asked slowly, clearly trying to read her expression as she was with him. She figured it was showing concern or sorrow. My nation does not deal in slaves. We do have bond familiars and summonable beasts, but no slaves. She said back calmly, then raised one of her upper eyebrows at it. Would it have been an issue if we did? The creature turned a bit away, clearly thinking over its response, before turning back with a bit of hesitation. Yes and no, I wouldn't interfere with your slave trade unless I deem it cruel and barbaric. But if you treated your slaves fairly and gave them an equal chance to earn freedom, then I would not do anything. After all, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. They said with a serious tone and expression, she believed. Next question, what is the highest form of alchemy advancement you made? Leani stared a bit bewildered. I am sorry, alchemy advancement? She was caught off guard by his question about a field few ever do research into, a field that only those who were mad or unstable worked in. No, not just alchemy, but also agriculture, military, sociological, and rudimentary earth magic studies. You know alchemy? The stuff you need to make anything and everything, the studies of the world. It said back, not really clarifying its line of questioning. Leani shook her head. I'm sorry. There is an issue with the linguistic boon. You are asking for things that my mind can't understand and is translating the word. She stopped and butchered her way through the word. As simple alchemy, which is a field that few do any work in. Jason cocked his brow again. This time she was sure he was confused, then stroked his chin. Okay, let me ask you this. How many of your people can read, write, and do arithmetics? He asked after a few seconds. Leani was thrown back again. She struggled to recall such information, then gave a half-hearted reply. About 6%, but most of that is limited to lower nobility and above. Jason stared at her for a few more seconds that she felt comfortable with before he sighed and walked back a bit, sitting down on one of the pews and groaning before looking back up to her. What is the best armor money can buy right now? Mail with plate costs about 7 gold coins, but only upper nobles can afford it, she said after a second, only to hear it groan and jump to its feet, spinning on point and kicking the pew, causing it to go sliding backward a good 5 or 6 feet, which, considering the solid stone it was made from, was more terrifying to her, but her ear picked up its words as it spoke to itself. Fucking 13th to 14th century bullshit. Which means fucking household knights and men-at-arms and stupid peasant levies. It cursed under its breath, then turned to her. Nobles? What are the ranks and privileges? She took a deep breath to settle her nerves, then looked to the pew it had kicked, noticing the fact it had cracked in half before looking back to the creature. There is my mother at the top, as the queen, then my eldest sister as the crown princess, the duchesses who hold regions in my mother's name, then countesses that hold territories, the baronesses that hold castles and small fiefs, then ladies that hold towns or small cities. She explained and noticed it nod along as it heard her, clearly taking in the information. Each one is responsible for paying taxes to the one above with the exclusion of my sister. They are also responsible for maintaining an armed force of some kind in times of peace or gathering a levy when we are at war. It looked up at her as she finished, then spoke. Yeah, that's what I figured, just wanted to make sure. I am a bit surprised that you run on a female rule, but I am not one to judge considering your nation's name as the queendom. It said quickly. Why not? Women have great amounts of mana and can manipulate magic more easily. Leani remarked faster than she realized, but shuddered as it glanced back up to her, sending a rush of fear throughout her, as her mana hadn't recovered enough to outrun it yet. I am not complaining or criticizing, I am a unknown, so I am used to the idea and am fine with it as long as you respect the fact that I am a man, it said back calmly. Leani looked it over again. It was nothing like a man, or maybe it was. Her people's men were normally a bit smaller than her and lacked mana too, and if it was a man, she felt that it was at least somewhat attractive. But something else pulled on her back to his last bit of information as she worked around the unknown word it had spoken, getting it to look up again. What does that word mean? It seemed shocked a bit, then smiled. Oh, I guess that concept wouldn't be a thing here without the mass dispersion of information and communication. Think of it as a scholar who reads a lot of books and studies arts for no other reason but entertainment. Because of it, I didn't think that you summoned me after my death as odd, just a bit surreal, or the fact you run off a female rule, or much of anything else. It is also why I asked about the power thing with my weapons and armor stuff, it said back in a cheerful tone. Leani tried to visualize the idea of reading and admiring art to a point that being summoned would not be odd to it, even considering it was from a manaless world, but let out a sigh as most books she read had history or facts in them, or they were religious texts. It cleared its throat to get her attention. Last question. The power you gave me, you said that I can create any and all weaponry or armor I wish with it, and I can destroy it too apparently. What is my limit? Leani wasn't sure how to answer this one. This boon was made by her, but it's true inner works were simple and basic. Considering it could make a staff that killed the raiders with thunderclaps, the melee weapon that disintegrated others, and that last weapon that breathed out torrents of fire like a salamander, she wasn't sure anymore. It wasn't to do what it said, but she intended it to allow this creature to summon suits of armor, along with swords and shields, battle axes and spears, bows and arrows, not magical tools that unleashed devastation on its victims. She steeled her thoughts and chose to answer directly. I am not sure anymore. Your method of warfare is completely different from what I had hoped to catch. I was hoping for a knight in plate of golden light. Yet I got you. Despite that, you have done as requested and dispatched my enemies with ease. Your weapons look like the battle staffs of my people, yet are far stronger. Add to that the last weapon you use, the one that breathes the flames of a salamander. I'm no longer sure what your limit is, but I suppose we can run a quick test. The Jason creature looked with a cocked brow but waited for her to keep going, a signal she realized a second later. Try creating the most basic of weapons you can think of, then the most advanced. The creature stretched its arms out to its sides, and after a second, two weapons arrived in its hands. On its left was a simple stone spear, not that much more than some backward tribe on an island in the sea would use. In its right, however, was what she could only describe as an oversized great axe with a box as big as the creature's head acting as the joining point of the blade and shaft. The odd thing to her was that nearly the whole thing was made of some kind of gold, with intricate iconography and heraldry, with a handle like that of a lever in the shaft. The Jason looked to the simple spear and smiled, then turned its head and let go of the massive axe, its face plastered in shock and awe as the weapon fell with a hard and echoing clank. The creature stared at the weapon for a few seconds that dragged into a half-minute before it moved over and lifted the weapon, and she saw as it held it with a sense of reverie that would be seen in a temple during a holy sword bestowment. She saw as it leveled the weapon and placed its fingers on the lever, then stopped and looked to her. Does this power make the weapons usable by me, you know, for safety reasons and whatnot? She pondered the question, but found no answer, so she looked back. I don't know. That weapon looks like a cross between your staff and a battle axe, she said, but she watched as it dismissed the weapon and summoned a new battle staff that looked like a green box from the most part, with a golden skull and wings on the side. The creature leveled it as it did with the staff it held when it arrived and did something. As a beam of what she could only describe as a disintegration ray came out the end and poke a hole of melting stone into the side of the building. The creature dismissed the weapon and then looked back to her, a grim expression on its face, before it spoke slowly and deliberately. This power is too powerful. I cannot only make a weapon that my kind do actually use in battles, but also weapons that we have a basic understanding of, which means I can use any weapon I can think of if I understand how it works. Those last two were from a collection of books and games that are set up to be in the far future of my world, and they are powerful. Like compared to what my nation uses now, those weapons would kick our teeth out. Leani shuddered, then fell to the ground, landing hard as her mind pieced together something she had not expected. It could make weapons that itself deemed as too dangerous, weapons that it had to ask her if it could wield safely, weapons that were not even used by its people. She looked up at it, and a haunting and terrifying image fluttered to her foremost thought. If it ever found out that she had tried to enslave it, it may turn its weapons on her and her nation. Leani sucked in 2 deep breaths as the creature reached out a hand, her mind still in a bit of panic, but the creature did smile and spoke. "Hey, are you okay?" It asked slowly and in a tone that sounded concerned. "I am the one that should be falling over, considering the fact I can make both weapons that did and didn't yet exist in my world. You have literally given me the ability to do what most, unknown, could only dream of." Leani slowly willed herself back in control of herself, then took its hand and found herself quickly and effortlessly back to her feet. The sudden show of force from it unsettled more of her. As it was, the creature's strength was reinforced, but she swallowed hard. "I must apologize again. My conduct is unbecoming of a princess in my position. Do you have more questions?" she asked in a soft tone that willed it to mask her growing fear. This Jason creature shook its head and spoke in a calm and genuine tone she believed. "No, I am going to help you and your nation. You have been good to me so far, but—" It suddenly pulled her in by their still interlocking hands and nearly growled the next word. "I am a free man and will not be made a slave to anyone, even the gods of this world, okay, princess?" Its eyes were locked on her. The proximity and stance, along with the way it was holding her in place, caused her fear to run rampant in her mind that was making up theories as to why it said that of all things, and before she could form a counter-offer or response, the creature spoke again. "I am not sure as to me you all feel normal, but I have a feeling that you are going to treat me like a summoned beast." As it let her go, she instinctively took a few steps back, picking up the longsword of the raider, but it raised its hand to her, as though to stop her from advancing her current plan. "Your reaction just now was all I needed. I'm going to forgive you this one time, however. If you or anyone in your queendom even attempts to put me under their will by might or magic, I will not hesitate to destroy them, then the nation. Is that clear?" Leani stared a bit bewildered, but mostly still terrified at the creature, and managed to fluster out a single word as her reaction. "How?" The Jason withdrew its hand and scratched at the back of its head. "Because I am an unknown, and I really like some regional works of literature and art, where the people in the story get summoned, and in a fair few slavery is a thing. Moreover, in a few slavery even knocks on the main entity of a story, and they are enslaved. I figured me and you should lay the ground rules of enslaving me, then suffer now over later." It said in a mixture of joy, weariness, excitement, and certainty, all of which did not dissuade her fear, but something about the way he smiled about it calmed her, a smile that was less of a clear threat and more of a promise, an agreement between the two. "I can't really complain about it now. Magic will not work on you even if I wished it had. However, my preconceived notion that I would have to enslave you to guarantee your aid was wrong. You are clearly a person with a complete personality, unlike the monster I summoned in the castle I once had." She started, but fell off. She barely escaped that night. "I will, however, apologize again for attempting to enslave you on arrival. Please forgive me, Jason," she said and bowed a bit towards it. "No, not it, him." Jason smiled warmly. "Apology accepted. Besides, it's not every day I would get to meet a princess," he said in a gentle and reassuring tone. "Now why don't we go and find survivors, then see about going to meet the queen?" Leani nodded and walked out the door, going about calling out to people while Jason just calmly walked behind her. The better part of an hour of searching gave grim results. As of the once 100-person village, all that remained was 4 women and 2 men. Based on their appearance, they were a family unit, and the three eldest women showed signs of having fought. After a bit of an explanation on who Jason was and why it was following her, the six allowed him to administer first aid, which to her seemed like little more than the practices of a herbalist. But Jason claimed that now they would hopefully not get an infection at least. Jason then turned to her after tying the last bandages he somehow created like his weapons. She couldn't even think of how or why it worked, as the item was neither weapon nor armor, yet it worked somehow. He smiled wide and then looked around. "Right where do we go from here, the capital, I assume?" Leani wanted an answer to how he was using his power, but shook her head. "The capital was lost 3 months ago, and the siege to retake it has been going poorly. To see the queen, we will be going east to the fortress city of Shreki, that is, where my mother is." She said, then looked around and thought over their search of the village, and recalled that most of the beasts were killed or ran off. It will take a few days to cover the distance on foot. Jason thought it over, then smiled. "I think we will not have to walk. Let me try something," he said, then raised his hand to a clear space, and a carriage of both metal and other things appeared next to him. It had 4 doors on the sides and one in the front and back that looked like it was meant for cargo or something, then thought it over and summoned a book into his hands. Huh! This was the straw that broke Leani's resolve to glaze over issues with his power. "What the lower planes?" she screamed out of annoyance, anger, and exasperation. "Books, bandages, and magic tools that summon smoke are one thing, but this is a carriage. It is not even a weapon, let alone armor," she declared while throwing her arms around. "What are you talking about? I am using the powers as you set them up," Jason said, and had to take a step back as she glared at him, her fury at the brazen display of using the magic she gave him in a way she never imagined. But he swallowed and continued, "This is called a war carriage. I have driven one years ago and made the book as a refresher just to make sure I don't fuck this up. It is the basic transport vehicle that my military uses. As for the books, bandages, and magical tools, they can all be used by me to kill things, so it's not like my power is not working right." "But how did you summon that? It's not armor or a weapon, it's a war carriage, as you called it. Add to that we have no beast to pull the damn thing, and I can only assume it needs at least 6 to 8 beasts, which we can't even properly secure too, as there is no place to attach the beast harnesses. So explain to me how the lower planes you summoned it?" She basically screamed back at him, her patience for this and his words not calming her down at all. Jason seemed to think over the issue a bit, then turned and walked to the front side of the carriage, undoing the latch on one side close to the door, before walking around the whole thing to the other side and undoing the latch there, too, before lifting the door up and out from the center and waved her over. As she walked, she noticed that the space for cargo she had assumed would be there was full of something, a complex construct of some kind. Before Jason spoke up, "This is the war carriage's advanced fire and wind magic construct. It allows this thing to move without the need for beasts for riding and labor. It can get up to about 96,800 yards an hour when fully loaded, or 123,200 yards an hour when it is not loaded up. It needs about half a barrel of oil to run off and can go for 880,000 yards on that." He looked up to her. Leani felt her blood run cold again. This carriage she was looking at, it could go farther than a rider on horseback. Not just farther, but also it could carry more. Her mind wondered as she looked over to the glass that she could see. Looking inside, the 8 of them will be a bit cramped, but they could all fit. "Your army uses them as basic transports," she said as she walked over to Jason, but he then spoke more. "As for why I can summon it, my people sometimes use it as a weapon tower. Add to that I can run over someone with it, and it provides protection to those inside, so to me, it is both weapon and armor," he said with a smile which made her head hurt at the idea that he was ferocious enough to simply trample his enemies with this thing. "So, you are skilled enough to make anything you can think of that is usable as a weapon by you because that is how I set up my spell," she said half-heartedly, and watched as he smiled and nodded. Her mind went into autopilot as she started to figure out what the hell that meant for him and how to handle this. And worse off, she would not be able to warn her mother as they would reach the city today. Leani finally snapped out of her active planning. Her seat inside the war carriage dampened the rocking as the carriage moved. The belts, he said, were needed for her safety, pulled a bit hard on her, but also Jason tapped her shoulder. He was holding some vial of blue liquid in his hand. "What is this?" she asked as she took the vial and looked at the unknown substance inside. "It's a mana potion. I tried to make one and succeeded. I thought you may need to let your queen and the city know we are on our way," Jason said back while continuing to control the carriage. Leani took the vial and looked it over, and she used the last of her mana to check it over, but like everything he made, it was unaffected by the magic. She took a nervous swallow and drank it quickly. The flavor was pleasant as it went down, about as sweet as some of the fresher fruits, but as soon as it hit her stomach, a wave of fresh and clean mana radiated out, and then some more than she could realistically use in a day. Then while looking at the vial, she looked up to him. "Wait, how the lower planes can you make a mana potion?" Well, you can break the glass and shove the shards into the throat of the enemy," he said, then glanced over to her and seemed to read the questions a bit deeper. "As for how I can make a mana potion, as I said, I am a unknown. And based on the test earlier, I figured that I can make things from other stories and games, so I gave it a try." He added, then pointed into the space between the seats, and she saw a veritable collection of different things. Some she recognized as swords, axes, shields, and even a wand, while others were those of battle staffs he used, but each had a distinct flair to it as it was clearly made with different core elements in mind, along with some talismans and jewelry. Reaching back, she took hold of one sword and pulled it to her. It was a short blade, about the size of a guard's short sword, but it was an odd design that had a wide plane close to the middle and tapering inwards a bit close to the handle, with a script of some kind running along the blade and some of the crossguard. "I don't suppose your world has Orkian in it?" Jason asked, in a tone she now recognized as a half-hearted joke. But his question to her was important, as he seemed to ask it because of the blade. "The Orkian are a vile and savage race, scattered into hundreds of tribes all over the world. Why do you ask?" she said back. Jason did something as the carriage suddenly came to a gravelly halt, and everyone was jerked forward while his treasure trove of weapons shifted into the forward area. "You have Orkian in your world?" he asked, and she just nodded, noticing his eyes going a bit wider as he thought it over. "You can keep that then. If it glows blue, it means that there is a Orkian near you." She furrowed her four brows, then looked over to him. "How?" she asked. Quell enchantment. The stories that weapon is from have both, and they are not friendly," he said, but she looked confused at his words. Which word did not translate? She uttered the short word and then added, "It translated as my own race." Jason started to move the carriage again. "Huh." He again withdrew and thought over the answer. "So the quell I am referring to are tallish and thinner than myself. They are described as graceful and elegant, pointed ears like yours, but only 2 eyes and skin was like mine. They are also considered to be extremely capable of using magic and have mastery over a few forms of martial skills, and they can live for a few thousand or more years." She thought over the information. If they were masters of magic, then maybe they were her kind, but from a story made to be closer to what his world could comprehend. She didn't think about it much longer, as she used her new mana pool to form a basic message spell to her mother and sisters who were in the city. "I have succeeded with the ritual, but the village was attacked by raiders. The summoned creature is unaffected by the magic, and we are on our way to the city. It calls itself Jason, and has agreed to help us as long as we respect its freedom and autonomy. I say again, it is unaffected by the magic, and we can't take forceful control of it. Lastly, do not anger it. Its power and way of war is honorless and terrifying. We need that fury pointed at the Chiantics, not us." She waited for a few seconds while staring at the sword he had given her, but looked up as the message spell was returned by her mother, her voice ringing clearly in her mind. "That is unfortunate to hear. I do not like the idea of it being loose in our cities and towns, but we will work for an answer for the next 2 days until you arrive. Hopefully, we will have a solution for how to keep it in line." Leani pouted and formed a new spell, calling out to her family again. We have already passed the village of Leani and will arrive a few hours before nightfall. Moreover, I had to apologize to him after he had read through my actions to bind him. If you try to wield power over him, I will not stand against him. Rather, I would beg it to spare me and our people. If you do not believe me, then look at what I have experienced since he arrived in our world. Please, my queen and mother, trust me in this. We will win the war and secure our future with his help." She didn't get a reply, but looked over at him, his eyes watching the path they were traveling over with exceptional speed, and realized that she needed to make something clear. "Is there any way I can get you to not be mad or angry with my people if the nobles or royals act foolish?" Jason blinked twice in a bit of confusion. Well, for one thing, I would not hurt or cause harm to civilians. I am a soldier, not a monster. I will fight and help you win the war, and if your mother or someone else tries, I will let them off the hook once. After that, I make no guarantees for their safety," he said in a grim note. "The second thing is that I don't hold people for the actions of their rulers. It would be like holding a child for the sin of a parent." His tone was calm and direct, and he was truly honest. She was locked on him, her mind piecing his statements. "Wait, everyone gets one pass?" she asked. Jason nodded. "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. You get one pass because you didn't know better. Do it again, and it's intentional, which means you get a free ride to lower planes," he said, and narrowed his eyes as though he was trying to make out whatever he was seeing. There is a fork. Which way?" Leani looked out the front window. "Left. We should be about—" A low rumble sounded from her stomach that was joined by Jason and 3 of their passengers, and she snapped her eyes to him, the rush of blood from embarrassment filtering to her cheeks. But his cheek, the one she could see, was a shade of red, which she assumed was the same reaction that she had. We didn't get any food, did we?" Jason said as he looked over to her, getting a shake of her head. And he leaned back. "How far to the city?" "About 3 more hours," she said quickly and looked back to the rest of the passengers. She looked back to him as he held his hands out in front of him, then grimaced at the large package of some sort of hard and partly reflective materials. And he put it aside, then summoned 7 more, before moving the carriage a bit off the path after making the turn. He undid the belt, grabbed packs, and tossed them to the back until he handed one to her, took one to himself, and started explaining how to use what he assured them was technically food. "Food? How? How can this be a weapon?" she asked as soon as he said it. He looked up at her and smiled. "If you are fed too much, it will kill you, therefore it is a weapon," he said in a tone she felt odd about. "That aside, this stuff is barely considered food, so don't eat more than you can handle. Don't worry about finishing it." They spent a good amount of time eating, and while he finished, no one else ate all of it. Not that any of them were complaining, they affirmed they were satisfied. They continued down the road and reached the outer walls and closed gate of a city that Jason looked at with a bit of marvel, close to the later edge of the afternoon as the sky encroached to night. He stopped the carriage, and she got out of the war carriage he had used and called up to the walls, "Open the gates. I am Princess Leani Wizalltrix. I am here to speak with the Queen." He stepped out too, but shuddered as he created the battle staff he first used. But the gate opened a second later as a single rider came out. The rider Leani noticed was someone she didn't want to meet. It was her eldest sister riding atop her greater war beast. Her armor gleamed a bit where the light landed. Her sister looked down on her with a fair bit of disapproval, then turned to Jason and cocked her brow. "My Grand Queen and Mother said it is not bonded?" she asked in a directed tone to her. But Jason spoke before she could answer. "I am not an it. I am Captain Jason Coleman, United States Rangers, male. Am 29 years old, and sorry, I am not bonded, but considering your attitude to the only other part of the royal family I know, I am guessing you are the Crown Princess," Jason said in a polite but pointed tone, however, readied his staff as soon as she reached for her sword. "I recommend you don't. While I am not sure about the wingless feline, I am sure that 5.56 will still kill you at least." Leani ran and got between the two. "Stop! Please, let's just go to see the Queen and discuss this in detail with her. She had tasked me to summon him, and I did. I would like for him to do what we summoned him for. But for that," He can't be treated as a summoned beast or familiar. His race is a thinking race, one our own religion obligates us to not bind," she said with as much authority as her station could muster. Her sister glared at Jason while his eyes flicked from her to her sister. His expression was ready, but hesitant. Clicking her tongue as she let go of her sword, her sister relaxed in her saddle and shifted her gaze to Leani. "You are responsible for it. You will go straight to the palace, and then you will have a few minutes to look respectable," she said before pulling on the reins and turning the beast around and back in, followed shortly by the gates opening more. Leani turned around to Jason and glared. He looked down at her but smiled. "Sorry, I don't like being called an it. I am a man, not an object," he said in an apologetic tone. She had to sigh. "Just please keep your tongue in check with my mother. She can't let an insult slide." She then turned and climbed back into the carriage, followed closely by him. They had spent a few minutes unloading their passengers, and Leani gave them a few coins she had and wished them luck. Then they made their way to the palace. She had changed into a dress that fit her, but was caught a bit off guard as she joined Jason. He was dressed in trousers that were a shade of tan, with a tunic of some kind green with a tan shirt and tie, and had a hat of some odd shape that flopped a bit off the side of his head. He had some medals and pins of different colors. She wasn't sure why, but the sight of him dressed like that made her heart's pound a bit harder. Then she looked away and started walking to the audience hall. As they walked in, there was a murmur of the few nobles present, more than a few questioning his dress, coming to the foot of the steps that lead up the throne. She looked up and took a kneel, but the murmuring grew louder, and she looked behind her as Jason didn't bend a knee or even do much more. However, before she could tell him otherwise, her mother spoke. "In your world, do people not bend a knee to monarchs?" the queen asked in a calm and even tone, but she watched as Jason bowed a bit. "No, they do only to their monarchs, however. I was left stunned by your majesty's divine beauty. Forgive my staring. I am Captain Jason Coleman, United States Rangers. I am here to offer my assistance towards your current war. I have a plan, but it is one that will take me about 150 days to activate," he said in a calm and clear tone. "Once started, I will not only win the war for you, but give your nation with an army that can kill and kill again. No nation but you will be able to start and end a war in a week." His statement and tone made the hall break down any decorum that it held, as more than a few nobles started to laugh outright and haul insults his way. But he just straightened out and locked his eyes on the queen, getting her to raise a hand, making the room fall silent a second later. "Captain, how exactly do you plan on doing this? You are asking us to hold the enemy off for close to half a year, and then you will somehow do what?" Leani felt her blood grow cold again as Jason grinned, her formerly light blush at the odd handsomeness he had now drained of color as she saw the dangerous entity she had witnessed in that village this morning. "I am going to give you 200 fighters that will be loyal to you and fight like me. Instead of marching across your lands, they will ride in carriages of steel and alchemist glue. They will kill your enemies not by the sword, shield, or arrow, but by the use of a well-made battle staff of fire and earth. They will be able to engage the enemies wherever they hide. I plan to give you a small army of men and women that can wield my weapons and use my fighting style," he said with a determined look in his eyes. "And if you really want to see how powerful I plan to make them, then call up someone sentenced to death, equip them in everything a knight would need, and watch me deliver them justice all the same." The queen said nothing but wave her hand, then turned to face him before looking down at Leani, her eyes furrowed a bit before she spoke. "Princess Leani, you had witnessed this Jason's way of war and called it honorless and terrifying. Care to elaborate?" Leani glanced up for a second. "I would actually make an addendum to my words, my queen. While his way of warfare is indeed honorless, he himself is an honorable man, however. I can't exactly describe what he had done. The weapon my spell was meant to be used by him are absent from his arsenal. Instead, he uses weapons that can kill enemies with thunderclaps, or cut his foes down from a distance like the great claws of a no-guard, or spew torrents of flames like a salamander. Moreover, it seems his training in the art of combat and kill is so effective that he has used his power to summon things that I had never even considered weapons. My queen, I am certain that without Jason's help, we will lose this war. However, I would advise that he takes over the siege at Qual Malair before he starts preparations for his plan," she said in a respectful tone. "You would suggest that I take command from your aunt and give it to a man?" the queen asked pointedly. Leani felt the eyes of everyone on her skin, their distaste for her suggestion clear as a few murmured in the background, and she looked away from the queen. "Yes, my queen, this Jason will, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, be able to retake the city within a week, if not sooner, as our spies have confirmed that the city's inhabitants have all already been killed off, and thus it is just a walled city we can't breach," she said, and kept her eyes mostly down until the doors opened as the sounds of footsteps came in. Looking over her shoulder, she could see a woman, a traitor that sold national secrets to the Vishal, was been pushed in. "Lady Pilfall, congratulations. Today you have a chance at freedom. As you have noticed, you have been given armor. In a few seconds you will be freed and given a weapon. Your task is to kill the man dressed in green. Succeed and you will be released." The queen's voice rang out, and the prisoner looked around and locked her eyes on Jason. However, as soon as she took up her sword and started to rush him, he willed the battle staff he used into his hands, and 3 thunderclaps rang. Leani was ready and had covered her ears before, but the rest of the hall reeled back. The Lady Pilfall fell with 3 holes in her, 2 in her chest, pouring out her green lifeblood soaking into the stone under her, and 1 hole between her 4 eyes. The queen quickly claimed that he would aid the siege rather than take over, as Leani's aunt had been leading it for a week now and had made some progress. Not that Leani minded. What she did mind was the fact her mother had burdened her with the task of acting as chaperone to Jason. Their drive, as he called it, towards the capital started early in the morning, after he had spent the last evening after the audience with the queen, testing the limits of his powers, much to her annoyance. But they finally found some limits. Not that it mattered to her, as even with the limit of line of sight and non-living entities, and lastly it seemed to place a bit of a strain on his mind, he still made a few hundred different weapons and equipment, and even more carriages and some giants, which he promptly dismissed before the city lost its collective minds, before he dismissed them all, claiming a headache. By the time he was done, the only way she could let all of this go was by reminding herself that she was the one who allowed this to happen. She was limited in magic, and the only school that she had a good connection with destroying her plans yet again. But he was constantly glancing at her as he drove. His expression looked concerned. "What is it, Jason?" She finally asked her morning rituals, a bit interrupted by him insisting they get going, leaving her a bit more agitated than normal. "Well, I think I may have done something wrong, so I am sorry. I forgot to tell you when I wanted to leave," he said in an apologetic tone, making her look over to him, his eyes that had no mana looking at her every few seconds for barely a second. "It's fine. I'm just tired from yesterday, that is all," she said back. After all, he was now her mother's pawn, not hers. He never was hers, really, and she didn't need his apology. Beast of burden, excrement. There is more to this, and you aren't telling me. Look, if it is some royal thing, then just say so. But at the same time, we have only known each other a day, so I get it, but—" he said, then moved the carriage over, before turning completely to face her. "Don't forget you summoned me. You are literally the person I have spent the most time with. And while we may or may not be friends, I know battlefields. So tell me why you are in such a pissy mood. You have been like this since yesterday before we left the village. So what the lower plains is going on?" She looked at him. Her rage at the turns her plans had taken cleared now after a night's rest. If he had been bonded, then she could just told him to stay out of her business. But he wasn't. He was a free and independent creature she had summoned. Moreover, she couldn't handle this by scolding him like a male of her kind. She was not more powerful than him. On top of that, if she did, he might just leave and allow her nation to fall. But her rage was mostly pointed to his crazy way of utilizing her power. But the look in his eyes right now broke her. That look of pity and compassion, that accursed look she got from the butlers and knights of the palace, the same look she gets from most who learn about her limits. You are the problem. You were meant to be a knight or paladin, some kind of warrior of skill and honor, a master swordsman or powerful sorcerer, but instead I got a woodsman who somehow knows how to use the equipment of the militaries of his world. A scholar who found a hole in my magic that allows him to make monsters and weapons that your world has thought up in the fever dreams of mad alchemists and troubadours. She ranted off, her annoyance at the long day of watching him make things that are not weapons, yet he found the ways to make them so, and by extension create them regardless. You were meant to be my ticket to winning over my mother to make me the crown princess. Instead, I am your god's abandoned chaperone, and any chance I had for the throne dashed with you. And I will remain as the only daughter that can only use summoning magic and mundane spells. A stain on the royal family, she said, and pulled herself up into a curl, hugging her legs, teeth gritted tight to try not to cry. Happy? No, I am not, he said, then turned and started to make the carriage move again. I didn't think that was the issue. If it matters, I'm sorry. But if you want the throne, then just stay close. I will make your name be the one the soldiers I train cheer. If you want the throne, then I will give it to you, but only because you are the one that gave me a second chance at life. She looked over at him. His eyes, or what she could see, looked pained. Did she really hurt him somehow? Some way of punching under his armor and wounding him? As for the woodsman comment, you got it wrong. In my nation, we have a few different types of soldiers. I am a ranger, which is an elite form of a soldier in the army. My job was to find the enemy and fight them. We conducted raids and assaults on enemy fortifications. We would rescue allies from enemies that had taken my people, and we were the ones that led the way for the rest of the army. And while we do know how to skulk in the woods like madmen, we are not idiots. She took in the information. It sounded like a scout mixed with the tasks of a knight and women at arms, along with a strategist. How could the word ranger ever mean that to him? Also, considering everything you saw me make last night, I haven't even gone through the whole list of things I want to try and make, but the fact I know how to kill in so many ways is because I am very well trained, but not just from my time in the army, but because of my childhood. I had to claw, kick, scream, and bite for everything I had. And my only refuge from the harsh and unforgiving home my father made was in the books and stories and games I read, played, or spoke to others about. He glanced over to her. So no, I am not happy. I am close to killing all your siblings and aunts and mother just to seat you up on that throne, just because I know how it feels to be abandoned. Leani saw it. Something she had not seen before, not the pity or compassion of a person looking down on her, but a man who was looking upwards beside her. She couldn't make sense of this feeling she had, her heart's pounding in rapid fire, and her cheeks felt hot. You would really give me the throne if I put my trust in you? She asked slowly. Yes, because I trust you not to try and sexual coupling me over, and if that is what you want, then I will get it for you, as long as you can let me chill the lower planes out in the palace after, he said as he started accelerating. Leani wasn't sure what he meant by some of those words, but if she would get the throne, she didn't care. If that is what you want, then you will have it if you place me on the throne. She wiped away her few tears as she spoke after a few deep breaths. So we are going as aides, which sort of means we can't really do much. However, I am sure if we can do something impressive, my aunt will let us do something greater, hopefully. Jason seemed to think it over as the carriage rocked over the last hill and the city at siege beyond. How about we just blow up the gates and go back, he said after stopping the carriage as they were told to do. Can you do that? The gate is reinforced iron and needs magic to move, she said. Iron gate versus one of the 60 weapons I can think of that will do the trick, he said with a wide, reassuring grin, then turned his face out the window as 3 riders were approaching. Can you talk with them? Make it easier? She looked over and climbed out, taking a few steps forward. The 3 riders were all knights of her people. She could make out the heraldry of her aunt, the 3rd princess, and the Baroness Juilan. Greetings. I am the 16th Princess Leani Tricks. I am accompanied by Jason Coleman of the United States Rangers. We have been ordered by Her Majesty the Queen to come and lend aid to my aunt in her grand siege, Leani said in the most regal voice she could muster, while seemingly towering over the riders, even without their height advantage due to her posture. You will escort us to her tent where I will tell her exactly how we will help. One of the riders, one she recognized as soon as she spoke, was her aunt's swordmaster. A woodsman and the dull princess came to help with a siege. What will you do, summon us some trees? the woman said in a tone that Leani hated. Not because it was disrespectful. It was because that was the tone almost everyone she had ever interacted with had when they spoke with her. "Is this your refusal to follow Her Majesty's orders?" Leani asked, maintaining the same tone she had. The three riders shifted a bit. Her jab at them basically committing treason unsettled them. She locked her eye back on the swordmaster. "As for me, I am the princess that had brought a powerful warrior from a realm that has no magic, and as such he can't be blocked by magic. He is a ranger, not a woodsman. He is a leader of armies, destroyer of his enemies, and wielder of weapons even you can't resist. Now escort us, or I will let him force his way to his objective." The swordmaster looked over and snickered. "Yeah, sure, I bet he can't even do anything. We will escort you so your aunt can send you away in the disgrace you are," she said, and wheeled her mount and started back down the path, followed by her two fellow riders, as Leani climbed back into the carriage. "Jason, change of plan. Destroy the gate as soon as you can after we arrive," Leani said with a bit of anger as she glared at her aunt's swordmaster and got a better idea. "Actually, can you destroy the gatehouse?" Jason stopped the carriage and looked over, a confused look on his face before he spoke. "Your mother asked us for help. Why would we destroy the gatehouse? Just the gate would be fine, no?" "Yes, it would be, but I want to wipe that dumb lazy's face clean when she sees how powerful you are," Leani said with a growing grin. "Besides, that way you can flex to an army worth of women that don't want to be here anymore, and we get to make a name for both of us." She watched as he started to think it over, then shifted in the carriage, half climbing out the middle through the roof, and a door she had not noticed. She leaned over and noticed him looking through some kind of device about the size of the food he made yesterday. Before he climbed back into his seat and started to move the carriage, "I think I have an idea. It'll be a one-time thing, as I am not sure I can even pull it off, but if it works, the gatehouse will be gone. It will also take me a few seconds to a few minutes, as the controls are hard to get to." She looked at him a bit confused for a second. "Are you planning on using one of those giants you made last night?" she asked nervously, and he nodded in return. "Do you have a second suggestion? I think you should save that for something more dangerous than a gatehouse." He frowned but smiled a second after, going back to thinking, "I could just blow it all to Kingdom Come, or maybe—" He spoke aloud as a new idea formed in his head. "It will take me a few minutes to get ready when we get there. Also, I am not 100% sure how powerful it will be, so I am going to use a weaker version. It should work out then, I think." She wasn't sure what he had planned, but as soon as they reached their destination, they both climbed out, and she walked straight up to her aunt's table where she was having a morning meal with others, and very proudly declared, "Are your troops ready for an assault? I and my summoned warrior are about to fell the gatehouse." Her aunt looked a fair bit like her mother, but younger by about 10 years, her blue-tinted skin already starting to shift to a duller color, and her hair no longer waving with her emotions as much, her 4 deep yellow eyes watching her with annoyance on her face. "My ungrateful niece, what are you doing here so soon? I hadn't even informed my captains of your departure from Shreki," she said before wiping away at her mouth and leaning back. "Our queen had ordered me and my summoned warrior to come and aid in your efforts. My warrior is preparing as we speak to breach and destroy the West Gatehouse and open a path for your forces. I suggest you get ready," Leani said back before turning and walking away, getting a few steps before she felt her aunt's magic tugging at her to return, but she powered through it. Getting back outside, she was a bit stunned as Jason was in what she could finally call a suit of armor. It was black as a moonless night, with a backpack and boxes attached that extended over his shoulders a bit. He seemed to be testing it a bit. Then he summoned 2 new items. One was about half his height and shoulder width wide and was made of some kind of metal, which he set on the ground carefully. The other was about the size of a pen, with a red cap at the top of it. He looked up to her. "So, are her troops ready?" he asked with a smile. Leani shook her head. "No, she probably thinks that I was jesting, not that it matters. Are you ready?" she said before reaching out and feeling the chest plate. It was not metal, but something else, still hard and rigid but warm to the touch. "Also, what are you planning?" Jason gave her a wide smile. So, the thing I am wearing is called a lightning magic armor. It will allow me to get on top of the gatehouse. There I will place this. He patted the box. This is best described as a explosive ward spell, but instead of exploding, it's going to use spatial magic to take the gatehouse and everything in it to the Ethereum Sea, and you get to pull the trigger. He handed her the pen device. When I come back down, you just press the red bit and goodbye to the gatehouse. I had to do some guesswork on how far the explosive ward spell should cover, but if I guessed wrong, then the troops will have a bit of a smooth bowl to cross, or a bit of the gatehouse to climb over. She had no idea what the lower planes he even meant by all of that, but smiled just before she heard her aunt finally come out of the tent and walk over. "My niece, you are not in charge here." Her aunt started before Jason stepped in the way. His head was suddenly enclosed by a helmet that appeared out of nowhere, and his voice carried out with an odd crackle to it but clear as day that he was speaking. "I am about to clear a path for you to win this siege. If your army is not ready to press the advantage, the Queen will hear of this, and I will make sure she hears in great detail the ineptitude and lack of discipline of your forces. But most of all, I will make sure she knows that the reason this siege was not won this day was that you," he pushed a gauntlet finger into her face, "are a self-aggrandizing failure of a duchess who, rather than end the suffering of her people, casually ate while your troops starved. Do I make myself clear?" Leani looked in shock. Such a display of challenge to her aunt left her aunt and many others stunned. As someone started to reach for a sword, one of the boxes on his back opened, and a battle staff of some kind came out and swiveled on a metal limb towards the knight with the weapon. He then spoke up again. "Do I make myself clear?" Her aunt nodded, and he stepped back. Turning to Leani, he held out a hand to her and summoned the ring he made yesterday. "Here, you can keep it in your pocket. It's a ring of cutting without cutting. It will keep you safe until I am back," he said. She looked at the ring for a second before taking it. He then grabbed the box beside her in one arm and summoned a short and boxy battle staff in the other. "Catch you on that bounce, troopers," he said before the backpack along with both of the calves of the suit opened up and threw him skywards on mana flames of powerful energy. As he reached the peak of the tall jump he seemed to take, the other box on his back opened and let loose a short series of pops followed by balls of fire all along the top of the gatehouse, the defenders letting out cries of pain as a few had survived his first attack this time. Then she heard the claps of thunder, but this was odd too as they happen a bit fast, making the sound let out a short-set crackles like when someone invoked lightning magic. She then saw him crouch down. "Humped," her aunt snorted. "Looks like you are still a failure. Your warrior has fallen," she said. But Leani's ears heard something else, and she spun to the carriage. Opening the door, she heard it. "Princess Leani, can you hear me?" Jason's voice called through some kind of magic listening spell in the war carriage. "Well, if you can you please tell your feasel-faced aunt that I have apparently killed the Defender's commander? I am claiming his head. Also, I am coming back. Be ready." She looked up in time to see him again be thrown skywards, but towards them, his battle staff in one hand and a head in the second, slowing his fall with a short burst of mana flames. He landed a bit away, but calmly walked up, taking a knee and holding the head of a Chiantix man to her. "This is their general. His name is Lythardan. He was watching us the second we arrived. I, as a contracted warrior of yours, offer this head as proof of my mission done and only need your act to end this task." Leani looked down to the head. The Chiantix's face was locked in a state of confusion, one of his horns broken off, and black blood pouring a bit out of it, but her eyes moved to her hand. As she held the small device he had handed her, pressing down on the red part, it gave way easily, and then a sound of ripping and tearing started. Her eyes shoot up to the gatehouse, where a massive ball about twice the height of the gatehouse appeared, before vanishing with an audible pop, taking with it everything that has found itself in the ball too, which included some buildings in the city and a good bit of the wall on the left and right sides of where the western gatehouse stood. Leani turned to her aunt with the biggest grin she could form, and to the swordmaster. "This is the power of a ranger of the United States, and he serves me of his own free will. Now end this siege so we may pursue the war," she said before taking the head and turning back to the carriage, climbing inside but leaving the door open. She watched, and the helmet of Jason opened up like it was never there, and he looked over to her aunt. "We will be leaving now. If the city is not the Queen's by day's end, I will return and take over. The gates are open and the enemy is disoriented. Failure now would only bring shame," he said before he walked to the back of the carriage, opening it, and removing the armor in a quick and easy manner that left all the knights and women-at-arms grow purple with envy over the ease the chest plate opened and allowed his to remove it. Then he stood and pushed it back into the rear of the carriage. Then his leg armor did the same, leaving him in just a long-sleeved, skin-tight tunic and the trousers he wore most of the time. Leani lost herself for a second as she noticed the musculature of his chest and arms before she shook her head as he closed the back of the carriage after loading the leg armor and putting his boots on, and walked to his seat in the carriage. Closing her door as he did, the carriage rumbled to life and he started to move it, taking them away from the siege camp and back towards her mother. "So how was it that I could hear your voice when you were on the gatehouse?" she finally asked once they crossed over the hill. "Oh, that would be because of this." He pounded a hand at the odd-looking black box with wires all over it. Then he picked up a piece that was a bit boxed, yet rounded with a grate over a part of one side and a protruding black piece out the side. "For next time, if you hold this," he pressed down on the black part, "you will be able to talk back to me. This way, even if I am on a mission, you can talk with me." "How far can this talking magic work?" she asked. I am not sure, but for the next half a year we are going to be mainly in Shreki to train troops, so I think we can test that over one of those days," he said back calmly, not certain about the next few days and weeks. She smiled. "Thank you, by the way. You did a perfect job, but there is something I don't get." Jason glanced her way with a cocked brow, a signal she learned was a simple confirmation of his willingness to hear what she had to say. "Aside from the mana potion and weapons at my people's level, how is it that you can use magic, yet be from a manaless world?" Jason seemed to furrow his brow, but she wasn't sure, as reading only half his face meant the other side was missing, but she believed he was thinking of an answer. "I guess I get it. In a way, there was a writer in my world that came up with 3 rules for advanced or unbelievable alchemy. His 3rd rule is what I think has you in a pinch. The 3rd rule he made says that any sufficiently advanced alchemy is indistinguishable from magic. To you it is magic, to me it is alchemy, but both things are true while neither of us is wrong. My world doesn't have mana or magic, so we figured it out, tried different things until something worked, then we learned to do that thing over and over until we understood both why and how it happened. Take my battle staff. You think it kills when it makes a thunderclap, right?" he asked, and she nodded. "Yeah, well no, see the sound it makes is because inside the battle staff is a small explosion that shoots a small piece of metal out at whoever I point it at. It's not the thunder that kills them. It is the metal that punches a hole in them and kills them." She leaned back in her chair and considered this. Could that mean that with enough time and effort her own people could make such weapons too? "Wait then, what about that?" she said, and pointed to the back where the armor was resting. "It used magic to send you into the sky. It almost looked like you were flying. That has to be magic." He turned and smiled, and said one word, once they had established what was or wasn't actually a piece of weaponry or armor of his world. "Unknown Dom." Leani slowly climbed out of the carriage as Jason grabbed a multicolored tunic and put it on. To her surprise, her mother was exiting the palace and coming straight to them. Her face showed a bit of surprise, but also anger at whatever she had heard. Likely her aunt and sister sent a magic message. She took to a knee and heard Jason doing the same just behind her, leaving her stunned. But she didn't get to ask him why he did so before her mother spoke. "Princess, I have been told that your—" Her mother spoke, then paused as her mind made a connection over whatever the report could mean. Ranger had completely destroyed the West Gatehouse and also killed and retrieved the head of Litharden, a justice done finally for the sacking of Kiwul. However, it seems you and your Ranger have disregarded proper decorum and honor when speaking with my sister, so I'm going to give you a chance to make this clear." Leani wasn't sure what to do or what to say, but her ears picked up a click of Jason's tongue and gave him a small wave of her hand for him to speak. "We apologize to you, Your Majesty. We had chosen to approach the issue with my understanding of warfare." he said in the calm but hardened tone of a veteran knight. When we arrived, I found the situation dire. The morale was terrible because of the long siege along with the depleted food supply. Moreover, the state of readiness for the defenders to sally out was near non-existent. Lastly, the Duchess and her council had no apparent wish to solve the situation, and by my assessment, she was intentionally allowing the siege to carry on. Princess Leani said little, however. I could not let the situation carry on. Your armies need to hold the borders, not be tied down in a long siege. I had pointed out her failures and opened the path to a swift and decisive victory. She noted the careful report he had made. He was painting her aunt as the fault, and himself as the one to break decorum. Before we departed, I had told her that if the siege was not finished in a day, then I would return and mount the next attack on my own, Your Majesty. I see. You had taken my orders with your understanding of your people's way of war. The Queen said slowly. Then she shifted a bit. Then you did exactly as you were summoned to do? She then continued in a calm yet sincere tone. I have misjudged your ranger, Princess Leani, as an acknowledgement of this grand task done. For now, I hereby mark you as the 12th princess, and grant you use of the Cloamentar estate as a home and base for the army your ranger will build for us. Continue to serve with the pride and honor of my name. Leani felt a shudder, and the joy of the moment carrying throughout her. Yes, Your Majesty, she said quickly to keep herself from losing her composure before her mother. Noticing her mother walking away, she was stuck on her knee for a few seconds longer. She sucked in a deep breath, her eyes watering at the overwhelming euphoria she felt right now. Her mother, the Queen, has not only noticed her properly, but also raised her rank. She was no longer the 16th, no longer the last of her sisters. Princess, are you okay? Jason asked from beside her, making her look up at him. His face showed happiness for some reason, but she nodded. Yes, thank you. I was not ready to be rewarded like this, she said quickly and noticed he was still on his knee too. Why did you bend the knee? Jason looked down at his leading foot, and she followed his gaze and noticed that the only part of him that did face her mother was his upper body. His knee and legs were pointed to her. I bend my knee to my chosen leader, he said after a second. And my leader had bent the knee to the Queen, so I did so to maintain your honor and station, that is all. Leani stared up at him for a few seconds before she lost control and let out a laugh, losing her balance a bit as she did, but found him quickly catching her and keeping her from falling over, which elicited more laughter from her, making her eyes water a bit more. After a few long seconds, she regained a bit of control and looked up at him. His expression was different, not one she had seen him make, his eyes soft and gentle, the way they flickered quickly about her face. His face not showing any emotion she could recognize, no fear or anger, not pain or discomfort, not his battle state when he fought, nor the deranged look he took when he thought about the Chiantics, not even the look of wonderment over some crazy thing he made. But this expression, for some reason, felt enlightening to her hearts, like she had nothing to fear at this second, and she wanted to know what this meant and why he was looking at her like this. Why are you looking at me like that? She asked, but felt a bit betrayed as her cheeks felt a fresh wave of blood pull into them. Jason's cheeks shifted to a redder hue and he looked away a bit. Sorry, Princess, I was just thinking you look really nice when you are laughing and your, smile is really lovely, he said, while hiding his face from her as he stood up and lifted her to her feet, but his voice was warm and sincere. She pulled a bit away. Thank you. She struggled to get out, her heart's partly deafening, and her mind not really ready for this, for him to say that, but trained practice in noble bearing called her back. I mean, thank you for the favor, however. I will withhold any entrustment for now. She suddenly added in a calm and rehearsed tone, but she noticed a bit of sadness in his expression as she spoke. But he smiled after a second. Yeah, sorry if that was out of line. How about we go to that estate and take a look around, he said, then looked to the carriage and walked away, shaking his head. Leani watched him for a second, but followed behind him. The estate they were given was one of the smaller ones that the royal family owned, with 2 floors and 15 rooms, a hall to host parties, and a fairly large parcel of land attached to it. And she was delighted, Her former home, which was generously gifted to her on her return from adventuring, was a fort off in the far north side of the nation, and while it was hers, it was awful. But she snapped to Jason as he made a monotone note as he stared up and around the estate. "This is perfect. How big are the grounds?" he asked, as the gates were opened to them by magic. About 7 farms," Leani said, but noticed him look a bit shocked. Then as he pulled the carriage up to the door, he deactivated it before climbing out. "Your mother said we can use it to build the army I plan to make, right?" he asked as he looked around. "Yes, I shall make a call for volunteers tomorrow. Is there any qualities we should aim for?" she asked as she came around the carriage, keeping her eyes trained on him. She noted his face scrunch up a bit, like it does when he thinks about something important. Then he looked up over to her and smiled. "We want those who can count, doesn't matter how high, also anyone that can read maps. Also, they need to be fit without the use of magic. Oh, men and women, I will train both. I'm not wasting my time with only half the population pool for recruits. I will need 25 that can read and write for now. We can recruit the rest later," he said, then walked towards the doors and went inside. Leani followed a bit behind him. The estate was being looked after and had been cleaned recently. However, the furniture was still covered in cloth, and it was dark for the most part inside. But the entry hall was spacious and well-made and decorated. "Thinking about it, we may not be able to house 200 warriors here," she said aloud as she thought about the layout of the estate house. It had 15 bedrooms in both the east and west wings, split between 2 floors, while the north wing housed the library, an arcanum, banquet hall, dining room, and kitchen. "Yeah, it would be hard, but I am thinking that if we make a few rooms into barracks for the basic soldiers, have 5 or 6 share a room, it will be fine, or we could have a new building added to the land," he said as he looked around. However, the sounds of a rushing Phainais came from outside. Drawing both of them back out, she noticed a rider bearing her mother's heraldry riding up to them. "Princess Leani, Captain Jason, Her Majesty has a task for you. The town of Osmer is being approached by a no-guard of Earth. You are to depart now and slow its advance until the Duchess Lashan can arrive and slay it." "Do you accept this task?" the rider said quickly. She looked at Jason, and his face furrowed like he was thinking it over, but he looked at her after a second and nodded, as a plan formed in his mind on how to confront the beast. So she looked back to the rider. "Yes, we do, however, inform my mother that we will slay the monster before it can even reach the walls," she said, and the rider wheeled his mount and rode off, holding the banner high. She turned to Jason after realizing that he may have not planned to kill the monster. "Can you kill it?" "Not sure, but if your spell that lets me understand what he said is right, I believe so. I would have to see the thing first," he said as he walked over to the carriage and climbed in, which got her to quickly follow. As they drove, she wondered why the no-guard had shown up, and how it got so far into the nation's interior without anyone noticing. It was a giant monster about as high as most city walls, and 3 times longer. Moreover, it wasn't known to be a silent creature. "So this, no-guard, is it like what I think it is?" Jason asked as they moved down the road that was built to connect Shreki and Osmer. "Well, I am not sure. What do you think it is?" she asked back, as whatever word he said was changed to this world's creature. "Well, massive reptile, wings that let it fly, it can breathe fire, ice, poison, or lightning, might be able to use magic. Something like that," he said. Leani couldn't hide her fear at the idea of such a monster. Sure, a no-guard was terrifying, but it couldn't fly or use magic. Moreover, it had no breath weapon like salamanders, yet he agreed to go when he thought he would be fighting that. "Higher planes, no. A no-guard is a reptile, like you said, and it is about the size of the estate house. It has no breath weapon or wings. Moreover, there is no record of a no-guard of Earth using magic. However, because it is a no-guard of Earth, it will have a hard hide that can't be cut easily, and will have covered itself in hard rocks to add to its protection." "Oh, good. That makes fighting it way easier," he said nonchalantly as they came around a bend and the town beyond. But he slowed the carriage as a crowd of people were walking their way. However, she didn't take her eyes off him, her mind not willing to accept his statement of battling a no-guard to be easier than whatever he spoke of. Though she could see why he thought that, she doubted anyone could fight the monster he described, but she had to find out why. "What is your plan?" Jason smiled to himself mostly before looking over to her. Remember that giant I summoned last night? The one you said looks like a knight of some house? Leani thought it over, and she remembered the 16 to 17 yards tall giant he summoned after trying for the better part of an hour, screaming like a lunatic to himself until he got it. It was a hunched-over monster, with a monster-sized battle staff in one of what she had assumed was an arm, and a sword of jagged teeth in the other. But it was covered in awe-inspiring plates like that of a knight, with a great helm on its face, its feet large enough to crush anything or anyone it stepped on, and its overall form looked a bit out of place with most of the things he made that night. However, the markings it had were similar to the massive axe and disintegration battle staff he had made yesterday morning. The thing you called a holy knight? He nodded. I am not sure I can use it, but it's the biggest thing I can make. And it also gave me a wicked headache, so I think I'll be fine today. I think a limit I have is based on the overall weight of what I am summoning, he said as they got up to the open gates. Also, I can't climb up into it easily from the ground, so I figured jumping on from a wall would be easier. She looked at him with a glare, but faltered as her wish to point out that magic could be used was moot because of his nature. Instead, she thought about this morning at the siege. Will I be able to talk with you? She asked with a bit of nervousness. Let me summon the Holy Knight. Then I will see if I can handle giving you something to let us keep talking, okay? He said with a smile. As he pulled up to one set of stairs, they both got out and started to go up, only to be blocked at the top by a group of actually disciplined guards. Move. I am the 12th princess and am here to help. I need to speak with the captain, she said in a tone that called for them to try and stop her, and her efforts were rewarded as they parted. The captain in charge of the defense was staring out at the distant tree line where a flight of cham took off. Are you the one in charge? Leani asked as they reached into earshot range, but was shocked as the captain turned around, and her face of worry broke to joy, a sentiment she understood, as the captain was Waina, a friend and fellow adventurer from before the war, and didn't hesitate to give her a hug. Oh, Leani, it is good to see you. Last I heard your fortress was razed by a monster of some kind, Waina said as she held her tight for a second, then pulled back, fear and anxiety on her face. But you have to leave. It's not safe here. There is a no-guard on its way. Leani smiled with reassurance and gestured a hand to Jason. Actually, we are here to help. We just need you to spread the word that I am sending out a monster of my own to slay the beast. Waina looked over to Jason and her face shifted to confusion. What can he do? She asked after a second. Leani looked over and gave Jason a nod, watching as he walked up to the crenellations of the wall and climbed up onto one of the gaps. Stretching out his hand, he made the giant monster of his own appear. Then Leani spoke up. That is his armor and weapons. He will be going out to slay the no-guard, and then he will return. To Waina, who like everyone else was stunned, as the size of the massive form rose about 4 yards over them. She looked over to Jason as he stepped down and walked over, summoning a backpack with a long cord that ended in a small device like the one from the carriage, the same type that she could speak into. Yeah, I feel fine. I guess it depends on the overall amount of weight, so the carriage, this, and lightning armor is not my limit, he said with a smile, then wheeled on his heel and ran at the gap close to where a battle staff next to the head of the giant was. Jumping hard, he cleared the gap with ease and landed on where a ladder was on the upper part of the giant, just over the head to the right. He quickly climbed up and opened a door at the top, climbing into the form and closing the door behind him. They stood in silence for a minute. He had said he wasn't sure he could use it, but he was willing to try. She hoped he could, but was readying herself for him to fail. However, just as it reached past a minute, the giant shuddered as smoke bellowed out of the top of metal chimneys, followed by blasts of fire and the glow of blue light under the helmed head of the monster. Ha, this feels a bit weird, but I think I got it. Jason's voice rang out and boomed a bit over the town before it came out of the backpack he had given her. Okay, I am ready. Also, I have already found the no-guard with my battlefield sensory magic, so I'll be heading off unless you want a show, princess. Leani thought it over, before holding up the device off the backpack and spoke back. I think you can wait for it. How far is it now? She said into the device and watched as the giant turned. About 3,520 yards right now, but it is closing. It will be here in half an hour. Jason's voice calls back from the pack. Leani looked up a bit to the head of the giant armor and smiled before speaking into the device. Wait for it and test the weapons on the trees. Get used to them. Wayna and I will start organizing support for you, she said, and noticed the head actually nod back before he answered. Sounds good. Also, don't forget to tell them who you are and what I am. Leani smiled a bit as he made the giant armor turn and walk away before stepping up beside Wayna and gently closing her agape mouth. So, send runners to all the guards, let them know he is on our side, and get as many ranged attackers as possible here, she said in a reassuring tone. Leani always felt a certain level of uneasiness when it came to battle. While her summoning magic could be powerful, she had no time to make the right preparations to summon anything powerful. But as she watched the massive suit of armor that her summoned ranger was using, her fear ebbed away to make room for reassurance. The massive form took colossal strides away from the wall, and she finally looked at this one and noticed that it was mostly the same as the one he made yesterday. However, rather than the toothed sword, it had a massive hand that crackled with lightning. But after a few heavy steps, he walking stopped and raised his battle staff.
Princess, cover your ears. I am about to test the weapon systems.
Jason's voice called out from her backpack, which took her a few seconds to put on. Okay, fire when ready, she said back through the device, then covered her ears and looked a bit at her friend. Wayna, cover your ears. It is about to get... She didn't finish before a loud and deafening clap of thunder that shook the wall roared. It was accompanied by the blasts of flames out the front of the battle staff, while a barrel of metal shot out the side. Wayna covered her ears just in time before the battle staff activated again twice. The distant tree line lost 3 trees as holes got punched into them before a fireball followed, incinerating everything in a 6.5-yard area. Then the sound of roaring claps of thunder rang. These ones were smaller but still painful on the ears if unprotected. And 2 clear lines, one from under the massive battle staff and one from the battle staff by the head, reached out into the trees. She noticed that a few trees had broken down at the base and fallen over before he stopped firing. Then the rounded box on top of the giant spun around, and the roar was like the call of a salamander came, as what had to be an unwieldy spear shot out of the box and soared high before coming back down, setting a 5-yard area ablaze.
Weapons test is done. All systems green. Ammo count is good. Aim and fire controls are normal. I'm ready.
His voice called out behind her. Leani uncovered her ears and spoke back. I think you may need to fight it a bit away from the town. A few of the guards had lost their breakfast just now, she said back as she looked around, and a couple of them had fallen over in horror.
Understood. I will move to engage the no guard when it breaks into the clearing,
he said back as the massive armored form shifted and took a ready stance, the battle staff in front like a pike readied to counter a charge.
For now, however, I'll just soften the thing up,
he added as the box fired off the last 5 of his spears. They soared high into the sky and off into the distance, before the clouds they made shot straight down to the trees deep in the woods. The roar of the no guard came back. It was a pained roar, like that you would hear only when someone had actually dealt it damage. But the beast was not done to her dismay as it burst through the tree line and sized her ranger's giant armor up. Her blood didn't run cold at the sight of the monster, after all. She had a monster of her own, which afforded her a chance to actually study the no guard. It was about 15 yards tall and 3 times that long, supported on 6 stocky legs that ended in massive clawed feet. It was covered in rocky piles of sharpened rocks that gave it horns across most of its back, head, upper legs, and sides, like a way too large quill fiend. She did note the broken bits of its armor where its green blood leaked out. It let off a defiant roar as it stared at her ranger and his monster. However, as Jason started firing, she noticed the lessened sound of thunder and looked to her side as a few magi were actively focusing. She looked back to the battle that was unfolding. Jason was striding slowly forward, firing all 3 of his battle staves. The fireballs and impacts of his magic assault were actually keeping the beast back, but the no guard was not a dumb beast. as it leaped with more grace than it would reasonably have out to the side, then rushed the armor. Jason managed to turn his massive battle staff to it, landing 3 hits on its side but not enough to slow it. He took a step back, raised his gauntlet, and clenched a fist, before slamming it into the no-guard's maw. A sizable bloom of lightning shot out at the impact, and a thunderclap broke past the dampening field the Magi were holding. The no-guard lost its momentum and fell sideways, before Jason grabbed one of its legs and spun, turning the upper part of his armor completely before releasing the no-guard, throwing it back toward the trees and away from the town, only to open fire again at the downed beast. But a no-guard was not easy to slay. It climbed to its feet, curled up, lowered itself to the ground, and started to endure the hail Jason was unleashing. But the sky over the no-guard shifted and sparked with magic, and she had to force her mind back to the present. "Jason, it is utilizing magic," she said into the device. "It looks to be some kind of assault magic. I believe it's a grand-level spell. Back away now." Jason took a few steps back, then braced while still firing.
"This armor is equipped with a nullification shield. I should be fine,"
she heard him call back as a hail of iron shards showered on him as the spell finished. But all the shards were thrown sideways or melted in the air before even hitting the armor he was using. However, the no-guard used its spell to hide its movement. She spotted it a second too late, as it leaped at his gauntlet, maws closing on the hand. But Jason planted his foot on the beast and pulled his arm back, and the no-guard opened its maw with a roar as Jason freed his armor's hand that had clenched around the muscly tongue of the beast, tossing it aside and opening fire again straight down the monster's throat, until the beast closed its maw and backed away. Jason then stopped firing, and his voice rang out from her pack.
"Ammo out, switching to assault,"
he said, as he started running at the beast. The no-guard roared and charged at him, too, its maw spilling out a torrent of its blood over him as it leaped and landed 4 heavy hits on his armor. But the swing of a clenched fist, joined by a thunderclap, threw the beast off, closing the gap created. Jason brought a foot down on the beast's side, using the battle staff to press the head away from him and grabbing at its throat. She could see the lightning of his gauntlet race over the beast until the area bloomed in a torrent of green blood as the beast let out a defeated roar. As the blood stopped showering the area, she could see Jason standing over the beast, looking down at it, but then spun around and let out a line of battle staff fire at the tree line. "Jason, what was that?" she quickly asked into the device.
3 Keontics. They were hiding in the beast's shadow before, but with it dead, my sensory magic found them. They are all dead now,"
he responded, then turned back to the beast, reached down, grabbed its tail, and started to walk back to the walls, dragging the beast along behind him. "I am going to guess that you can use this beast for meat and materials." Leani nodded a bit, not that she was sure if he could see. "Yes, I think we should take the head back to my mother and let her know we are on the way. Can you carry the head?" she asked into the device. "Yeah, but I need a break. The weight and power of this is already messing with me. Also, I don't want to leave our ride here, so I better unsummon it too," he said back after dumping the beast near the road and walking over to the wall. As the giant armor came to a stop, shuddering as the billowing smoke and glow of the helm faded the door he had climbed into, now covered in wet and thick green blood, opened, and he carefully came out. Looking over at her with a smile, he shouted, "Do you think the Queen will like our gift?" Leani failed to suppress a smile at the idea of a no-guard's head as a gift. "Yes, I think she would love it. I'll inform her we will be returning soon and warn the guard not to stop us," she shouted back and looked to Wayna. "Can you send a few riders to clear the road and inform the residents that the city is safe now?" Her friend looked over at her, a mixture of awe and fear, but nodded and walked away to get things ready. Leani looked back to Jason as he carefully jumped onto the wall and walked over, his skin a bit wet for some reason, and his breathing a bit fast. "Are you okay?" she asked, a bit of worry at whatever had him like this. He blinked a bit surprised. "Oh yeah, it's just that this thing has a bit of a will of its own. You see, when I use it, I have to take control in a way, acting as the thing's brain, but that will try to get me to act the way it wants. Also, it is intoxicating to be using it. I felt it all. The recoil of the battle staff, the ground under its feet, the bite the no-guard took at its arm. but also the fact that it could destroy most things, topple a city of town on its own, tread a path of fire wherever it walked. He said, then sat down before laying backward next to her. Not sure I can hold out in that thing for more than an hour or two. Leani carefully kneeled next to him, pulling at the skirt she wore to keep it from looking unkempt. I see. That is not what I thought would have you like this, but what would happen if you did? Lose myself and never leave control of it, he said back in a stern tone. It's okay, though. I think we will use this only for when we have something big like that to fight. Leani considered it. With one of these, he could indeed take over a city, or decimate an army of Kaintiks. But was that an acceptable trade for his skill and knowledge? Yes, I think that is a good idea, however. The Kaintiks do have a habit of summoning large battle beasts in battle, but not as big as a no-guard. Not a problem. Rider infantry equipped with some counter-armor weapons can deal with that easily. Jason said between deep breaths, if something really big showed up, I can deal with it with a champion light magic weapon. After a few minutes of his breathing finally let himself recover before he sat up, got to his feet, and looked over to the massive armor. I feel like switching this one out for a different one, just so it would have ammo. That may be a good idea. Can't guarantee the road would be safe, but will it have room for me? Leani asked as he walked over, watching him dismiss and summon a new one. Yeah, well, no, but you can ride on the top. I can leave the door open so you can have an easier ride. It will be a bit uncomfortable, he said as he walked to the stairs and looked down. Right. Well, let me send a message to my mother, she said before closing her eyes and focusing her magic. My queen, the no-guard has been defeated. We are returning with its head for you, however. We will be arriving in a giant suit of armor. I request the guards be informed. She opened her eyes and watched Jason jump back onto the now new and non-gore-covered suit, climbing quickly in but leaving the door open. Then a reply came back. I shall meet you and your ranger at the gate. She looked up as the new suit came to life. Its hand came up and waited for her to get on. Her taking a hesitating step forward, the hand lifted her up to the door and she climbed off. Looking inside, he was strapped into a chair with a helmet and suit on, but he looked comfortable. Right. My mother will meet us at the gate. How are you feeling? She asked, and was ready for him to speak through the armor or the pack he had given her. Instead, the helmet he wore opened to reveal his mouth. I am okay. I am going to start moving, so please hold on, he said before the air around her whipped as the suit took a step back and spun around. The rocking of the massive form threw her into him, and he let out a grunt as she landed. Princess, can I ask you to move? He said in a tone of pain. Looking at how she landed, blood rushed to her cheeks as she had landed elbow first into his stomach, getting up and away from him, but was stopped from making much distance in the cramped space. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that, she said, but nearly fell over again as the suit took a second step. She finally looked about, found some footing beside his feet, and held on to two handholds in the front of the space they were in. The third step still shook them both, but she got to see him reach down with the hand of the suit, and with a sickening twist, rip the head of the no-guard off before standing straight and starting to walk not along the road but through the trees beside it, pushing them aside with ease. About a minute into the walk of the monstrous suit, one step was a bit bad, and she had lost her grip and fell backward, landing in his lap and getting a grunt from him as she tried to quickly get back up. His arm held her back. It is fine. It will be more comfortable for you this way, he said in a tone that for some reason sounded delicate to her. She wasn't sure if that was fine, but she realized that no one would ever know, so she settled in before responding, Tell no one of this. My kind doesn't allow for such a position. She leaned a bit back against him as his arm that had stopped her came around her waist, as the rocking was indeed lessened. But her hearts pounded a bit hard in her ears, and the blood rushed to her cheeks, her eyes linger on the muscled arm around her. The warmth of his form pressed against her, and the steady rush of air on her neck when he breathed out, all summoned new feelings, ones she never really considered, ones she had always hidden. Her braided hair was struggling between the two of them as emotions ran amok, and she had to lean forward and pull her hair forward to stroke and soothe herself. Was this really what she thought it was? He had promised to give her the throne and held her as an equal. He treated her like she had always wished, standing beside her and acknowledging her. But she shook her head and dismissed these emotions. He was an outsider, a summoned man, brought here to fight a war, not be her concubine or something more. "Can you tell me something?" she asked, as the sensation of being held by him faded a bit. "Sure, what is it?" he asked back. "Why do you know so many weapons from stories, and why are they all so powerful?" she asked calmly, and they shook a bit with each step. He seemed to mull over the question. "Most of the stories and things I am drawing these weapons from have motifs of war and strife, or were placed in the far future, or in a world of magic like yours, or a mixture of all. This thing was made to protect my people against monsters and things like the No-Guard, but it was later used as a tool of war too, and I am a massive unknown, so of course I had read, seen, and played games that were based on those stories. I can only summon things I know and understand how they work, and I am limited by a 16 and 5 yards in 3 directions space, which luckily meant this is the biggest thing I can summon. Also, I think I can handle making maybe 4 or 5 of them." She felt a hard shake as a step was taken, and she steadied herself with a hand on his leg. He lost his thought for a second, then spoke again. "As for why they are so powerful, that is because the stories normally have my people as the weaker ones, and we win by having weapons that overcome our limits, or can be used by magic-enhanced soldiers. So this one, this holy night as you called it, was meant to protect towns and cities?" she asked, and pulled her hand away from his leg, a bit embarrassed at the proximity of her hand to his groin. "Yeah. In the stories it is from, it was sent to other worlds in the Ethereum Sea, where it would protect the settlements until they could protect themselves," he said. "In those stories, these were the things that acted as grand warriors, fighting enemies using similar weapons, fighting hard, while soldiers and knights fight under their feet." Leani thought over the idea. To fight under this as it fought itself, surely she might get crushed, not to mention deafened by the weapon's fire, or flattened by one of the barrels it threw out to its side, and she inadvertently shuddered at the thought of being in such a battle. "I see, so what kind of army do you plan to make?" she asked, wishing to change the topic. "Well, it will be about 200 fighters split into 5 groups of 40, then break each into groups of 8. Each group will get 2 carriages and weapons. Then they will learn to use the carriages and weapons, and when I am done, they will be able to go and get to where they need to be quick, fight the enemies, and reposition before any enemy army even has time to start moving," he said with confidence. "This is basically a dumbed-down version of a rider infantry, but without a massive supply network and active reconnaissance. It is the best I can offer." "How fast would they be able to reposition?" she asked, as she remembered the importance of cavalry and their roles on the battlefield. "I plan to drill them until they can unload, attack, and load back up and start moving within 5 to 10 minutes, he said, and tightened his arm as the following step was hard, and got her to shift a bit to be more centered on him. If they can get that down, the only limit to the fight is awareness of their surroundings, and the distance they have to cover before they attack again. Her mind summoned the idea of 2 of his war carriages rolling up to a battlefield and unloading 8 of him, all of them firing the battle staff he used. Realizing that they would be close to unstoppable, their attacks cutting down waves of Chiantics and monsters alike. "That sounds like a good idea," she said after a second. "Leani, we have a possible issue. I am detecting about 150 entities," Jason said after a few more minutes of walking. "They are currently moving along the road at a high speed. Do you want to intercept?" Leani thought it over. They were still a good 10 minutes from the city, but a large number of knights moving fast could be an issue. "Yes, move to the road. Close the door for now," she said as she felt the shift of weight as the massive armor changed direction. "Can you show me the outside?" "1 second. He said, then some kind of image magic appeared on the metal wall in front of her. As they got on the road, the image shifted, and the sight of a formation of knights fully equipped and riding hard. But their leader was the issue. She had hoped it would be her mother, but instead, it was her eldest sister. "Can you allow me to speak outside the armor?" "Squeeze my arm when you wish for them to hear you," he said, and she noticed her sister's formation slowed. Squeezing his arm, She heard her voice ring out and towards the formation. "Hello, sister. As you can see, we have handled the no-guard. The town of Osmer is no longer in danger, and we are returning to Shrekki to present it to our mother." Her sister shifted a bit. Leani noted the anger on her face, but was caught off guard by her words. "12th Princess, you are hereby charged with reaching over your station. You will surrender and unsummon the monster you are controlling. Failure to do so will be considered treason, and we will execute you on the spot." Leani sunk back, her mind drawing a blank. Why is this happening? "Princess, we can win if we fight, but I can't guarantee that I will not kill anyone," Jason said from next to her. "However, we did get the order from your mother, so message her and check." Leani didn't think of that and summoned the message spell. "Mother, I am being stopped by the Crown Princess. She claims that I am being charged with breaking the line of tasks. However, it was your messenger that had relayed your order." She heard Jason speak through the giant armor. "We are verifying your claims. We had acted under Her Majesty's orders. Please stay still." Then the image she was looking through flickered, and her sister was outlined along with a box that said something in an unknown language. Then he spoke right to her, locking her sister out of the conversation. "The readout says your sister is ready to fight, basically waiting for us to say no." Leani looked at the image and frowned, however. Her mother's reply gave an answer, one she was not ready for. "I did not. You had acted on your own before I was even informed of the growing situation. However, my spies have uncovered the origin of the orders. The Crown Princess had done it with a bribe. I will allow you to choose how to handle this, however. We can't lose too many knights right now." Leani let out a slew of insults into the air, but Jason's voice next to her snapped her away from her ranting. "What happened?" "This is a trap. Our orders were from my sister to make it look like I am going against tradition," she said after a second, then squeezed his arm. "Crown Princess, I have verified your order, and the Queen has allowed me to handle this situation. You are now being charged with impersonation and bribery of the Queen and her household. You are to stand down and be taken back to the Queen to stand trial. Failure to comply will result in your immediate execution." "Princess, do you want me to kill her if she fails?" Jason asked. "Yes, but avoid killing the knights. They have not done anything," she said quietly before she started praying while watching her sister. She heard the moving of the left arm of the armor, and a small X settled on her sister, while a second one positioned on her mount. Jason spoke, his voice ringing out with a terrible amount of force. "Surrender now, you can't beat us. You knights are now under the direction of the 12th Princess and will escort the Crown Princess back to Shrekki by order of Her Majesty." Leani watched as a clear circle started to form around her sister, who was still glaring back at them, and the display beside her changed. "Princess, she is not backing down," Jason said. Leani didn't want to do this. While she never liked this sister, she was still her sister. As rude and aggravating as this sister could be, mainly because of being the eldest and by extension the most well-trained and experienced. However, as a princess, she had a duty to perform, so she reluctantly squeezed on his arm. "Sister, stand down. I do not want to have to use force, please. You have until the count of 5. 5. She watched as her sister glanced around. The knights had backed away from her and then looked back at them. 4. Her sister then shifted a bit in her saddle and gripped her lance a bit tighter, her face growing angrier. 3. Then the Crown Princess started trying, unsuccessfully, to cast something under her breath. 2. Leani frowned, as the spell her sister was planning to use was a paralysis spell, and it harmlessly didn't work as the armor was not a living being. 1. Her sister reared her mount and started a charge, her lance leveling on the head of the armored monster. "I hereby execute you for the crime of impersonation and bribery of the Queen's household," Leani said, but looked away, a few tears slipping free as the twin claps of thunder rang. "I am sorry, Princess," Jason said a second after, then spoke through the armor to the assembled knights. "Take her remains with you and return to Shrekki. Do not act in disrespect or dishonor towards her." Leani couldn't hold it and quietly asked, "Can they hear me in here?" "No, and I will not say a word. They are also leaving and we can wait," Jason said, and brought his other hand around her. Leani didn't want to do that. Even though she wanted the title of the Crown Princess, she didn't want her sister's death, as unrealistic as it was. She wanted to prove her worth, to show the family she could handle as much as them, and more. But this hate for her that forced her hand was too much. She slowly turned in their seat and hugged him tight as her tears slipped away, her hidden grieving of a sister and the pain of being the one to commit that act. And all the while he held on, cradling her head and rubbing at her back. She wanted to undo this, to go back and change fate, to make this right. But that is not how time works, and what has happened couldn't have happened any other way. After longer than she wanted, she shed the last of her tears and pulled back, seeing his face freed of the helmet he was wearing. She finally noticed that aside from the window above them, the inside was a near pitch black. And in the small column of light that framed their faces, she saw him. A new expression, one she didn't know about, plagued him as he reached up a hand and wiped away a tear that lingered on her cheek. "I am sorry for your loss. I am not sure what your relationship with her was, but you are not wrong for being in pain over this," he said slowly, his hand still holding her a bit. Leani wasn't sure why those words were actually comforting to her, but that didn't matter now. "Thank you for, holding me just now. Let's get moving," she said slowly as he let her go, and she settled back in after turning around once more. She heard the helmet enclosed around his head before the armor came back to life, and the magic display flickered on again. The road was empty and clear of the knights, and her sister's body was evidently taken too. Then the armor moved, and the world of this confined space rocked as it strode onwards. She considered her next actions and thought over her chances. On one side, she had acted on her own initiative, but she should have reported to the Queen about her plans and checked for approval prior to going after the No-Guard. But she had assumed that the order was from the Queen, so acted as such. Normally that would not be an issue, however. She would have still technically broken from tradition, as she would be expected to seek the counsel of her family and offer the chance for glory to someone more skilled. Which in her family was everyone but her. But she didn't. She had to go off on her own and pick a fight, and in doing so publicly snubbed her older and more experienced sister. Worse still, she and Jason succeeded effectively, at least to the public, making it seem like her sister was not as great as she claimed to be, an insult to her wounds. Then, due to the break from tradition, her sister came out here to get her to recant her sins and apologize. A perfectly made web to undermine her or kill her off. A brilliant display of the cutthroat politics of the royal family. A trap made with a clear and well-laid plan, one she had run headlong into. She has to be more careful of the future. While she may not see much more progress over the next half a year while Jason prepares his army, she would need to be cautious of everything she hears. The real question was how her mother would handle the loss of the crown princess. The line of succession is based on the number of daughters, and while she is not the youngest, she was, and maybe still is, considered the weakest. And your place is chosen by the Queen alone. One way to move your rank is to kill one sister off, but that normally didn't start until the Queen started to show signs of the life-end kiss, which her mother would not have for the next 50 years. She, however, always planned to rise in rank by merit, as she wanted to see her sisters bend the knee to her. But having lost the chance to see her sister be shocked at losing her rank did make her both mad and sad. "Princess, the gates are open, and we have a welcoming party waiting," Jason said, making her look up into the display. The welcoming party was most of the advisors and vizier, along with her mother front and center. But she didn't look happy, but not mad either. While she did feel a bit better to see her father in the ranks of the advisors, she focused on her mother, quickly wiping away at her face to clear any signs of tears, and set her hair back behind her and made sure her braid was still set. Then spoke softly, "Stop a good distance away, and then let me down, then follow behind me, and let me do the talking." The door popped before she noticed the hand come up over the display. Climbing slowly out, she grabbed the pack as she got out. Standing on the hand, she watched as the crowd looked on in a mixture of horror and awe, except for her mother, who maintained her expression. Leani didn't mind as she stepped off and started walking forward. She was still a bit far, but that was good. It would allow a show of force, and she walked with confidence, chin leveled and eyes forward. But she did feel a bit nervous every time the ground shook under her. The weight and power of the giant armor sent a shiver through her. But Jason was her summoned champion, and trusted she would be safe even with the monster he was controlling. As they started to get within speaking range, the stomps stopped. She took a knee a few seconds later and heard the wet slap of the head of the massive beast set just a bit behind her and to the right. But the queen and her entourage looked shocked as the sound of screeching metal cut behind her. Taking the chance, she noticed that Jason had somehow made the massive suit of armor take a knee too. She looked back to her mother and spoke aloud. "Your Majesty." She noticed that her mother refocused on her. "We had gone to the city of Osmer to end the threat of a no-guard. I would like to gift you with its head, as it is by your will that the town was saved. The battle of my ranger and the no-guard was a clash of titans, and the ground and walls shook at the exchange of blows. But we succeeded in the end and made our way back. However, during our return, we were intercepted by the crown princess. We then found out that the orders we believed we were acting on were not from you. We request that you forgive our breach of your power and only acted for the benefit of the nation." Her mother's expression broke for a second before it hardened up again. "I see. I was informed that you had to end the crown princess. What were the charges?" she asked in an emotionless tone. Leani took a breath. It was the tricks of her mother. No one but her and her daughters knew about the spy network she had. The crime of impersonation of yourself, Your Majesty, and the crime of bribery of your household. She was offered a chance to face you in a trial but chose to fight. My ranger executed her under my order. Her body should have been returned here. However, while it will offer little comfort, know that the crown princess did not suffer, as my ranger's weapons cut her down clean and quick." There was a bit of silence where only the light rumbling of the armored giant was heard before her mother spoke again. 12th Princess Leani, you are forgiven for the act of familicide, as you did so for an acceptable reason, and your break of my authority is also forgiven. However, I will not be rewarding you or your ranger for the services you have rendered to the nation. Do you object to this ruling?" Leani looked down and bit at her lip. This was the way it was, which means she would not advance up, and their battle with the no-guard would be a tale told but not acknowledged as a service to the queen, thus stripping them of any merit they would have earned. "No, Your Majesty, your rule and rights are absolute. I would never act against such a graceful decision." "Good. You may leave that head here and return to your estate. Start on the army you promised, and we will see how the future unfolds," the queen said before wheeling her mount and going into the city. She stood back up and watched her while the armored giant moved, then stopped rumbling, followed a bit after by the grunts of Jason, and felt his hand land on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked from behind her. Leani nodded, then turned to face him. "When she looked at me after I told her about Irena's death, she looked proud for a second," she said as she thought over the interaction. "Is it bad that she looked proud?" Jason asked hesitantly. Leani shook her head and gave an uncertain answer. "I don't know, I have never seen her look proud of anyone." Leani felt off by the latest development over the past 3 weeks. Not the matters of the royal family or the war or the monster sightings. These developments were the odd kind, the kind she never bothered with, even when adventuring. These developments were because of the 25 recruits of the army she and Jason were building. 25 younger, prettier, and eager female recruits, each constantly making efforts to win over Jason. And while she did join the training and acted as the check for the ones that were, as Jason put it, cheating, she still felt off by it all, even after she had witnessed the way he acted towards them. He has maintained a respectful distance and has refused a few outright after some more bold attempts. His actions towards her haven't changed either, still ready and willing to listen to her and make plans to set up the army or find the limits of the recruits, but still maintained a respectful air between the two of them. She wasn't sure what to do, but kept watching as the recruits were doing their shooting practice. Each was given a M401, which, according to Jason, was the standard weapon of the army, and was the battle staff he had used when he first arrived, and she even learned how it worked a bit. The real reasons she was here and watching will likely be the same reason most of the recruits were slacking off. It was hot today, Summer was around the corner, and the suns were bearing down hard, and Jason, in a show of either not understanding decorum, or did, and was dressed like this intentionally, was dressed in a shirt that was already hugging his skin and gave everyone a show of the tone form of his chest and abdomen. While she did enjoy the show, her eyes landed on one recruit who was now actively not practicing, and said recruit was staring at Jason as he was very actively dressing down a different one for nearly shooting her teammate. Picking up her radio, she pressed the button down and spoke to Jason. "Recruit Cone is staring at you again." She notices him snap his head and point a hand at the recruit, and in a loud and commanding voice, one that carried up and out the firing range he had built, spoke, "Cone, your accuracy is still too low for you to be staring like an apprentice. Get more bullets down range, use them or lose them." Cone, a bit startled, quickly turned back to the target and started shooting again. But Jason turned back to the recruit he was lecturing, ending it with a pat on the shoulder and likely a few words of encouragement. He planned to get these 25 into soldiers of an acceptable quality, then set them up with 5 acting as leaders, and the other 20 split under them, and have them train the rest of the soldiers. While they acted as the overall command, but according to him, it's taking longer than he wanted. The first week was terrible for the recruits, and she was sure at least all of them had tried in vain to use magic to get him, mainly to get him to ease up on the week-long physical training he had them doing. After that first week, he eased up and added lessons on combat tactics and weapons usage, along with lessons on the usage of the equipment he had provided all of them, which included A-plate carrier, helmet, radio, grenades, and the war carriage, which are called Humvees, and she learned how to use one while he taught them. But this was the end of the third week, and he had hoped they would be ready by now for, as he put it, a milk run. She noticed him looking exhausted and shaking at his shirt, likely to cool himself off, before he called a stop and told them to rack their weapons, go get some food, and go to the classroom after. The recruits did as told. For the most part, a few asked to keep practicing, but she saw the sour notes on their face as he likely told them not to. She can't say she was surprised. He was a hard drill master and never let them act much on their initiative. As he turned and started walking away from the firing range, she noticed the tiredness on his face. The past 3 weeks were harsh on him most of all, between the lack of sleep from eager recruits and the constant need to keep an eye on them while they learned to use their weapons. He looked drained, and the heat of the day was also bad for him. She was nice and cool thanks to magic, but he couldn't use it. Instead, he walked up to the table she was sitting at and took up the jug she was keeping cold. Poured out a cup for himself and drank deeply. Leani failed not to stare at him as he drank, but looked away as he finished and started to take short sips of his second cup. "So, how are they doing?" Leani asked as she carefully looked a bit away to hide her blush. Jason let out a sigh and took a deep breath. "I want to have them get their feet wet with a fight, but they are only now realizing that those weapons are dangerous." He said back and turned and watched the recruits. "But they are taking to the lessons well, and all of them understand how to use the Humvees, and they are getting used to running with their kits on, too." Leani thought it over. Over the last 3 days, 3 of the recruits had to make visits to the temples. 2 had gotten themselves shot in the arm, and 1 lost her finger when her battle staff went off. But Leani also remembered how quickly Jason treated them, to the point where getting to the temple was possible on foot, not that they walked there. "Yeah, I have been keeping an eye out for potential fights or minor battles they can have, but with everything I have seen, they are not likely to win," she finally said back and glanced over the recruits, a bit sorrowful over their slow progress. "It's okay. I was overestimating them," Jason said back in a comforting tone. "The fact they have come this far on the flying beast excrement of a training schedule is commendable." Leani looked up at him, a bit surprised. "What?" she asked, a bit bewildered. "Yeah, basic training is meant to take 22 weeks, and more to get the amount of training I got," Jason said back calmly, before drinking his cup of water dry and pouring a new cup. Leani found herself staring at the boggling amount of training he got just to be a soldier, and according to him, he had served and survived for 7 years after that. But as he suddenly looked towards the gates and reflexively reached for his sidearm, she was snapped out of her haze. Looking back, she saw the rider that had just shown up, a rider carrying the heraldry of her sister, the heraldry of the newly minted crown princess, and the rider was looking around pointedly. "Follow, but don't fight. It's a messenger from the new crown princess," Leani said and got up. Watching the rider carefully as they approached, the rider was a young girl, likely in her early 30s to 40s. "She is a messenger. She looks like she is 12? Jason asked quickly. Leani lost her stride and looked back to him and took an expression he had used a few times, one brow cocked and pointed at him. "What? She looks like she is 12. I mean, yeah, I have seen 12-year-olds ride small beast for riding, but they aren't royal messengers," he said in a slightly uneasy tone. "Jason, how old do you think I am?" Leani asked in a sharp tone. I don't know, maybe like mid-20, I think," he said nervously. "Must be a racial thing then, she is likely mid-30. Leani then turned a bit back and added, "And I am not that young." Leani's mind ended up drifting elsewhere while they walked over to the messenger. She had heard him claim to be 29 a few weeks ago, but thought it was a jest to anger her late sister. Now she wasn't so sure, moreover the new question of how long he can live cropped up. Locking her eyes on the messenger, she recognized her. She was one of the daughters of a rising lady whose army was successfully defending her domain, if only just. The messenger spoke up as soon as they had both reached earshot. "12th princess, the crown princess, has decided to grace your—" She glanced about before looking back. "Army with her presence, she will be visiting in 2 weeks. Be ready to demonstrate the power you plan to lead to her plans for this war," she said, then wheeled her mount and rode off. Leani was pissed off by that, and the thought of having Jason shoot down the rider crossed her mind, but shook it free and turned to Jason. "How old are you?" she asked directly. 29, he said with a bit of embarrassment. "But you look older, so I guess it is a difference between our races." Leani then turned and walked away quickly. "Whoa, wait a tick," Jason said, then ran up. "You say that, but why is this so important? How long can your kind live for anyway?" Leani stopped. Her mind thought about it, but wanted her answer first. Biting her lip to suppress her emotions, she turned to face him. "You first. How long can your kind live for?" Jason slowed, then stopped. He watched her carefully, clearly trying to read her expression. 80 or 90 on average, but some can live longer with a healthy lifestyle." Leani failed to suppress her shudder as her eyes went wide. "His race lives for 1/10 of hers, and they are still capable of combat and thought. The understanding of the world is the longer you live, the stronger and more capable you are. And she was only in her early 70s. She still had a lifetime to master more skills and gain power. But he has already lived 1/3 of his life, and she will outlive him by a few centuries." She shook her head and shut her eyes, not wanting to think about this, and not now. But a pulse ran through her as his hand touched her cheek, and his voice called out. "You live longer than I do, don't you?" he asked in that calm and gentle voice he had used after they had dealt with her late sister. That comforting tone made her feel like things would be all right. She nodded slowly as her cheeks felt the heat of his body, the hot day's suns still building up his core temperature. "I am not going to ask how long or what your age is, but I will do my best not to judge with my eyes, however. I want you to know it will be an honor to serve you," he said, before pulling his hand away. She opened her eyes and looked a bit up at him. His expression was a reassuring one he had given her a few times, a look of faith in her. Leani nodded and smiled. "Right, sorry about that. My kind can live for about 10 times yours, and I'm only now truly into my adulthood. But I will do everything in my power to make your final years comfortable, as long as you keep your promise to me." She had expected a curt nod or a quick affirmation, but instead she got something far more. Jason looked confused for half a second, then went to a knee, head bent down. "I, Jason Coleman, hereby pledge my life in service of Leani Wizzaltrix to act as her bannerman in times of war, and her advisor in times of peace, to never raise my arm against her or her heiresses, to stand and hold against all that would threaten her, and to carry out her orders without question. I make this pledge in sound mind and body. I will live as her blade in the darkness, the watcher on her walls, and the shield that guards her realm." I pledge my life and honor to her until its end." Leani was left stunned and swallowed hard before reaching down to his shoulder. She wasn't sure if his pledge would hold in her nation, but a pledge is a pledge, and as a princess, she had her part to play. "I, Leani Trix, accept your pledge, and will vow to act as a just and fair mistress over you, to guard and protect your home, and to hold you for as long as you are loyal." She took a step back. "Now rise as a knight of my household and take your place beside me as we march onward." Jason rose slowly, with the warmest smile his still sweaty form could manage, but the moment was interrupted as a slew of calls and cheers came from the side, where the whole gaggle of recruits had watched the whole thing. Leani smiled and softly spoke. "Stun grenades." Jason didn't hesitate and pulled his sidearm free, repeating her words, and started firing as soon as the oversized handheld battle wand beeped and spoke. "Stun ready." Firing 3 stun grenades at the recruits, most of whom had the good sense to run back around the corner. This new weapon was a rulings giver, he claimed, but the sheer number of different magic shots it could use left her skeptical, to say the least. Leani had sequestered herself away in the library and was actively reading a book that Jason made for her. She had to cast a linguistic spell to read it, and some of the content was lost in the magic. A few words, but not a lot. He had been doing these since they came back from Osmer, and while at first she was skeptical of the content, every book he gave was an instruction manual of some kind. Each covered a specific topic, from politics and economy to warfare and sociology, and each one was a bit of a slog to read through. But she noticed the merit of study, and he even agreed that when she finished one, he would make a book from a series she wanted. So here she was, reading up on the political reasons and the ramifications of something called colonization. And for all the higher planes, it was boring beyond reason. Yet the idea of reading more of a series called The Freedom, it had both a story and art in it. It told the story of a wonderful friendship over something as mundane as swimming, but she still enjoyed reading it. She had a good feeling that Jason was likely going about teaching the recruits about some battle that happened in his world and how it was thought, then would likely ask them how they would approach the same battle but in hers, with full or limited access to magic or resources of this nation. A common theme he set up was telling them that they can't find the enemy, an effort to get them to think about scouting too. An effort that has paid off for the most part, as he keeps saying, information is power. Not that she ever disagreed, but the way he explains it makes it seem like he had more access to that information in his world. As she sat there reading, her eyes landed on something she was not ready for, as the gifted sword Jason had given her started to glow. Its blade slowly shifted to a pale blue and was held there. She thanked Jason under her breath for his suggestion to keep the blade a bit out of the sheath, and her free hand reached down to the sidearm he had given her. A battle wand he once used as his, but now hid under her dress, luckily for her easy to get to. The Sigkauer M17 fit in her hand easily enough, and she ran through Jason's instructions on how to use it. She then scanned the room and spotted an Orcian woman coming in through a window. Leani pulled the weapon free and leveled it on her, summoning some strengthening magic to allow her to use the weapon with one hand. "I recommend you speak quickly," Leani said in a stern voice. The Orcian woman didn't seem surprised, but maybe upset. As she stepped forward, she held her arms out to her sides. "12th Princess Leani, I have come to deliver a warning, one my tribe's shamaness demanded you be aware of," she said slowly as she bowed a bit. "The summoned being you have brought, he must have a child. 50 years after his passing, the world will require his blood again. If not, then the world will fall to the Empire of Night, and all will know nothing but carnage." Leani thought about that answer. Jason will die, and if he has a child, it may or may not have a long lifespan, depending on his partner. Moreover, the Empire of Night is mostly isolated beyond the borders of the Kialmus Mountains, and rarely ever leave their little paradise. The real issue is that they are extremely territorial and exceedingly bigoted. But they have only ever sent raids to other nations, and they are far beyond her nation's borders, effectively a distant issue, one that would take them months to reach, and vice versa. "You understand that that is a lot to take in. The Empire of Night has only ever sent envoys to my lands," Leani said back. My shamanist says to watch how they react next time to Jason, and all will be clear. The Orcian said, then took a few steps back and leaped back out the window, taking a sprint into the trees at the edge of the estate. Leani considered her words, and in her adventuring days, she managed to get in for a week to do a job. But for them to be a problem was odd. They had adopted a strict neutrality policy with the rest of the world and never engaged in anything, not even trade. She remembered their land, the magic that they had kept the lands in a state of near constant shadows. Even at the peak of summer, the clouds didn't break. She shook her head and put the battle wand back in its snug holster after activating the safety. This was not something she needed to worry about now and turned back to the book. Flipping a page, she found an image of a pair of humans. One was a male, she could tell that much, and the other was likely a female. A bit curious about it, she looked more carefully at the woman. While the image was black and white, she could make out the features well enough, along with her body's dimensions. She slowly stood, equipped her sword to her belt, and walked out to her room with the book. Finding the large mirror, she looked between herself and the woman in the image. The first difference she knew of was her skin. She was a light shade of blue, with a thin layer of plates just under the surface. Leani felt a bit off by that. The woman in the image looked like she had smooth and soft skin, but Leani's was hard in the areas just above the plates, and natural recess formed in the gaps. Looking back at the image, she noticed the woman's eyes. While she wasn't sure about the color, their shape threw her off. They were a bit bigger than Leani's, as her eyes were smaller and took up the same amount of space on either side of her nose. Leani looked up to the mirror and took a closer look at her eyes. The two sets rested one over the other and had mana running along the edges of her eyelids. The golden yellow of the royal family is clear and vibrant with her life still ahead of her. She glanced up at her brows. She didn't have a thin layer of hair like Jason. She had a row of plates that glowed softly, containing a bit of her mana. She looked farther up at her hair, frowned a bit, and undid her braid, letting her hair free, allowing it to move with her emotions. It was shaking slightly, the thick strands that shifted and pulsed with the beating of her hearts. Nothing like the woman in the book. She pulled back as her hair dropped. Was this why he kept his distance? Does he want the company of a human woman? She uncomfortably braided her hair. Royals can't give away emotions easily. But her hearts felt heavy. She thought about Jason. At first, she considered him a monster, and the way he dispatched his enemies was honorless and efficient. A cold and calculated way of war that even the Kaintiks would be afraid of. Yet now, after almost a month of watching him, she knows more than ever he is a man. He is kind and compassionate when he needs to be, stern and demanding when required, and cold and wrathful when he has no other choice. And somehow when she sees him, her heart's lost their pace, and her breath grows short. Her eyes can't stop staring at him, wishing he would look her way. She shakes her head. These thoughts are wrong. He is a summoned champion, and now a knight of her household of just two. Just she, an eligible princess of a grand nation, and he, her sworn knight and guardian. She sighs and picks up the book, looking over the woman. Leani glanced at the mirror, considering her figure. She was not considered curvy, but she did possess an above-average bust. Her legs were toned from long walks as an adventurer, which held up her supple rear. She was fit and healthy, and her body showed it. Looking back to the book, the woman would be considered less fit than she, but she couldn't help but think about those differences. If all women in his world looked like her, or she was the peak, then Leani would be a divine entity, unless the woman was at the bottom of the line, in which case she wouldn't even register in his mind. She gripped the book hard, her mind thinking of other races in this realm, in this world, some of whom even Leani couldn't compare to. The thought of her losing him to the seduction of someone else was hard on her, and in a fit of anger, she threw the book hard, shattering the mirror. She stared at the broken pieces, her mind demanding more, to break something else, to hurt someone else. But her door was forced open as Jason ran in, sidearm in hand, and looked around. "Princess, I heard the mirror break. Are you okay?" he asked her, his face showing worry but readiness to act and fight for her. Leani stared a bit shocked by the speed he had arrived, the distance he had to cover to get to her, and spoke weakly in a shaking voice. "I am all right." Jason relaxed a bit and took a closer look around the room and spotted the book. Walking over, he picked it up, and to her dismay, it opened to the page she was on. She withdrew, not wanting him to look at her, ashamed at her outburst and lacking faith in her appearance. Jason glanced at her once, then closed the book and placed it on the table. He said nothing but walked closer, pulling her into a hug, a deep and reassuring one. Leani gasped as he did so, as for the first time in 3 weeks he had embraced her like this, the warmth of his body surrounding her, the gentle and steady beat of his heats. This is what she wanted, and he gave her without a word. "You don't need to worry about how you look," she heard him say beside her as he pulled up and cradled her head to his shoulder. "I know that it's hard, but I also know that you aren't human, and I don't care. I will like and serve you, and you alone." She could tell he was honest, his voice calm and careful, the steadiness of his hearts and the measure of his breath. "I am sorry. I know I shouldn't compare myself, but I have missed this closeness, as unconventional as it is," she said slowly, her voice frail at the admission. "It is wrong of us to be so. I am your summoner, you are my summons." She tried to push away, but he didn't release her. "You are wrong." His voice was hurt, and his body flexed to keep her there, to keep her in his arms. "You are my savior. You gave me a second chance at life, and I am happy to give you that life." His hold loosened, and he pulled back so she could see his expression. It was warm and kind, a soft and apologetic smile on his lips. "I am sorry for keeping you at arm's length. I didn't want the recruits to think I was favoring you, as I feared they would bother you to curry favor." "So you aren't avoiding me because you dislike me?" she asked with faltering words. He shook his head, his expression shifting to a reassuring smile, a look of care and compassion. "No, I did want you to be bothered by them, but if you ask, I will make my care of you public to them," he said with a tender voice, his soft tone hold the word in the air between them. Leani felt a wave of relief wash over her. He wasn't hiding from her. He cared about her well-being and gave her space to work as she wished. But she shook her head. It would be wrong to let others see this. Their closeness. She was a princess, and he was her summons. "No, just please don't hold back when we are alone." She looked back up at him. His expression was overjoyed, and he leaned in, closing the space between their lips. Yet he held shy, the gap but centimeters apart, and spoke a request. "Can I kiss you?" Leani didn't want him to have this, so she kissed him. She would initiate, and it felt right yet forbidden. Leani didn't like dealing with her sisters in general, however this new crown princess, this one she truly didn't like. But having heard Jason's confession and the goodnight kiss they shared every night since allowed her to stay calm. And calm she needs to be, with her youngest sister and now crown princess arriving. Her only hope is that their preparations are done, but she has confidence in Jason's plan. A smile curled her lips as she thought about him, and risked a glance over her shoulder at him. He was just behind her to her right. He was dressed in his dress greens, as he calls them. She took a second watching him, the stern look he had right now, the green eyes that had stared at her soul and smiled, those supple lips that were only ruined by a scar from the left upper side across his cheek. He had come every night for the past week to wish her good night and share a kiss, always holding her with gentle care. His eyes flickered to her, and in a low voice he spoke. "Princess, your sister is arriving." Leani snapped back to face the gate as it opened, and her youngest sister at the age of 40 rode in on her mount, the saber cats, as Jason calls them. This sister was in Leani's opinion the worst, not due to age. Leani never cared for such things. It was her personality that made Leani hate this sister. "Sixes," her sister spoke as she slid off her mount and walked forward. "Oh, I suppose that nickname doesn't work now that you are the 12th. The tone was cheerful to mask the truth that she didn't want to be here. Leani smiled politely and gave her a gentle bow. "Crown Princess Jalam, it is a pleasure to have you here at our compound." She stood straight after the short greeting and waved a hand to Jason. "This is my ranger and sworn knight, Jason Coleman of the United States Rangers. He will be here to explain anything you may wish to know," she said in a polite tone while hiding as much of her emotions as possible. Her sister takes a cheeky grin, likely forgetting Leani's newly appointed position. "Oh, A summon as a sworn knight, then it can think and speak. I must say, sister, your summons have been lackluster as of late. Leani felt a rage at having Jason be called it, but kept it hidden and smiled softly. Well, large monsters are fine in a pitched battle, but for adventuring they are impractical, she retorted calmly. Shall we show you our progress? We will need 25 of your guards to join in, she adds with a wave to guide her towards the large field they have prepared. 25 of my guards against your 25 rookies armed with thundering sticks, the Crown Princess says in an amused tone that shifts to serious. I have been told not to allow you to point those thunder sticks at me. I will not allow you to do the same to my knights. Crown Princess, I have equipped our team with a special kind of weapon that works somewhat similarly to the real thing. Your knights will not lose their lives today unless they disregard the rules of this mock battle, Jason said in a calm and collected tone. I can vouch for the safety of the items he speaks of, Leani adds as she remembers using one not too long ago. The paint battle staff was different from what he had been teaching the recruits to use, but they found it far easier to handle. Well then, if any die, then you shall take the blame? Her sister asked pointedly, a trap laid before their eyes. Provided they heeded our instructions, then yes, however, if they disregard them, we are not at fault, Leani said back in a calm tone. They walk to the large open field, and Jason walks over to some prepared boxes and opens them. Leani took her chance and looked at her sister. Pick your knights 25 and they will not need their helmets. The Crown Princess called up her best but newest, believing she held the advantage. Jason short instructions on the use and safety of the face masks he was providing the selected knights, and then guided the rest of the onlookers to a raised platform overlooking the field. Pulling out his sidearm, he looked to Leani and fired a flare high into the air, signaling the start of the mock battle. As expected, the knights rushed to the highest hill on the field and took up a box formation, waiting for Leani's army to appear. And appeared they did. Riding onto the field, the 5 war carriages moved in perfect unison, pulling up and parking inside the weapons range of the rookies. The knights quickly shifted to meet any foolhardy charge. But the rookies got into a loose formation similar to those of archers and leveled their weapons at the knights, and began to fire, painting the knights from head to toe in red paint, leaving no point aside from the uncoated shield arm. Jason, that is enough. I think we have proven our tactics. Let's move on to the actual weapons demonstration, Leani said after 10 minutes of her newly forming army recoloring her sister's knights. What? Her sister looked confused. Your army, she said sarcastically, just stood there and fired. My knights would have been able to stop all ranged attacks with magic. Leani smiled at her sister, knowing the truth of Jason's weapons and how magic can't stop them. Crown Princess, I assure you that if this were a real battle, your knights would be dead. But if you need proof of my words, then come with me to the weapons demonstration. Her sister eyed her for a few seconds, trying to read her expression, but sighed. Very well, sister. I will entertain this claim until after the weapons demonstration. She waved her hand, getting a signal horn to blare, announcing the end of the mock battle and the victory to be decided later. However, her 25 newly painted knights were less than happy to be denied a battle, and most so when cleansing magic didn't remove the paint from their armor and clothes. Leani's rookies, however, quickly and efficiently loaded back into the war carriages and vanished back into the tree line of the field, leaving her sister and her knights visibly confused. Do your soldiers lack etiquette? Is that why they are not following us? Her sister asked as they started the short walk to the firing range. Her voice oozed with confidence at a fault in Leani's army. No, they are simply returning the war carriages to where we store them. It's a 20-minute ride at full tilt on an Alethu, Leani said back, getting her sister and her escort to stop dead in their tracks. And how far did they come for the mock battle? Surely they were nearby at the start, one of the knights asked out of turn, but none corrected her. Leani smiled politely and shook her head. They traveled that distance when my ranger fired the signal flare, and they now travel it back before getting a larger carriage to arrive here again, hopefully just as Jason finishes explaining the weapons. Her sister and knights again started moving, many more than confused, while others looking angered, not that it would be uncommon, An Alethu at full tilt going for 20 minutes is a difficult ride even for the best knights, but in the war carriages, it is a fast and somewhat comfortable endeavor. As they got to the firing range, Leani gestured to a table where they had set up more than enough headphones to help against the sounds of the weapons being demonstrated. This will help each of you withstand the sound of the weapons fire. All of them are linked by magic from Jason's world, so conversation can happen, but I ask you all to refrain from speaking unless it is to ask a question. Her sister and her knights each took one and put them on following Leani's example on how to properly wear them. "Please follow me, Jason. Are you ready?" She spoke into her microphone. All the assembled looked shocked that they could hear her even as the world was closed off from them. "Yes, Princess. I have finished checking the weapons and the ranger is now safe for you all to enter." Jason's disembodied voice rang in their ears. Leani smiled and led them down into the long and recessed firing range. Jason was standing at a table nearby, a small collection of the basic weapons each soldier of her army would be expected to know and operate. Each knight settled into a provided bench on the rising slope behind the two princesses, who settled themselves into thrones. Leani's, of course, less ornate or comfortable. Jason picked up the main weapon of the army and held it like he did when explaining it to the recruits. This is a Mark 16 Scar L. It is the standard issue weapon of this army. It fires 0.218-inch metal bullets at a muzzle speed of 956.66 yards a second with a range of 546.80 yards. Leani had to double her efforts to suppress her joy as a few people behind her fainted and her sister's hair began to noticeably and fearfully shake against her braid. "Wait!" The crown princess bellowed louder than needed with the microphone. "Are you telling me that his weapons, the ones that your soldiers will be equipped with, can kill at over 200 yards, and it closes that distance in the blink of an eye?" she asked, her 4 eyes wide in panic as she in her youth forgot all lessons of discretion. Leani nodded to Jason to explain. "If the shooter is skilled enough to do so, yes," he said in a calm and clear tone. "However, we are drilling in a 2-tap system where each soldier fires 2 bullets at their target, increasing the likelihood of a kill." "Jason, please continue with the explanations. Our troops will arrive soon," Leani encouraged, trying to move the explanations along so they could get to what she and Jason agreed was the fun part. He smiled and continued with his explanation. "As mentioned, this has an effective range of 546.8 yards and can fire 625 rounds per minute. However, every soldier will only be equipped with 7 boxes of 30 rounds, giving them 210 rounds to use before they need to rearm." He picked up one of the boxes that carried the bullets and loaded it. Aiming at a target behind him, he fired in rapid succession until he fired all 30 rounds. "As you can see, I not only hit a target but landed all my shots in a tight group, maximizing the kill potential of the weapon. These skills have already been learned by our 25 recruits." He put the weapon back down on the table after checking if it was safe to do so. "Any questions?" The few knights that passed out lost the support of others as many in the escort went pale. The newly painted knights in particular seemed to have seen death greet them in person. The crown princess gained her composure first and smiled with a giggle. "Oh, sister, you had me," she said with all the arrogance of a princess unaware of Jason. "This weapon is impressive and frightening, but barrier magic will block it easily for sure, and only a concentrated fire will break those barriers." "Oh, don't worry, sister. I plan to address your thoughts later in the demonstration," Leani said back with a sweet and sisterly tone before looking at Jason and gesturing. "Jason, please move on to the next weapon." "Right. The next piece is the standard sidearm." He picked up a smaller handheld weapon, again presenting it for everyone to see. This is a Glock 19. It is chambered in .40 S and W, with an effective range of 54.68 yards. A muzzle speed of 316.66 yards a second. It carries 17 rounds in its box, and in the hands of our soldiers, it will be their weapon of choice for fighting in the tight confines of a city. He proceeded to load the weapon and fire at a target in his effective range, again showing a mastery of the weapon, before checking it was safe to place back on the table. "Any questions?" Just then a massive carriage rolled up, and the recruits disembarked, quickly assembling and saluting the princesses. Leani quickly saluted back and gestured to Jason to move on. Kits on, full fire drill in effect, Vinan, Cold Eye, Pooley, go get our special targets ready. Jason barked at the recruits, setting them into motion. Sister, is that? The Crown Princess started, but lost her words as the 3 designated recruits set up targets with permanent barrier spells woven into the armor the recruits placed on mannequins. Yes, they are, sister. Cost us a good amount of gold to buy them for this demonstration, Leani said back calmly. Would you care to inspect them before we begin to verify their authenticity? The Crown Princess looked stunned by the idea of looking at them up close, much less stepping out to a killing field, but she pointed at 2 knights. Verify that those armors are properly enchanted. All troops stand by, weapons safe, Leani said into her mic, getting her recruits to immediately check their weapons were unloaded and that the firing range was safe for the 2 knights to move across it. Their inspection was quick but thorough as they each took a turn to swing at the armor, their swords glancing at the mana barrier the armor made. Before they quickly returned to the princesses, the senior one spoke quickly. The armor is both authentic and high quality. We believe each is easily worth at least 10 gold coins, your majesties. Sister, did you spend 70 gold on a weapons demonstration? The Crown Princess asked, a small amused smile curling her lips. Let me guess, the 7 lucky soldiers are your best shots too? Leani smiled politely and spoke in a meaningful tone. Actually, we gave them to our 7 worst shots, the 7 that have yet to reach the hit efficiency to pass their recruitment and basic training phase. The pregnant silence for her sister and knights still conscious was deafening if it mattered, however. Jason continued with the preparation and broke the dread that lingered. At the ready, he said once all the recruits were lined up in front of their targets, weapons pointed down and away from any side for the 250-yard expanse of dirt. Take aim, he ordered, getting the recruits to raise their weapons and train them at their respective targets, their stances perfectly held to counter the recoil of the weapon. 2 boxes, fire at will, he said, the sudden eruption of thunderclaps ringing like the disorganized hammering of 100 drums. But Leani didn't care as the look of terror and bated breaths of those watching was priceless. The knights that had faced the recruits in the mock battle began frantically trying to remember how many times they each were hit and where. Those who hadn't been in the mock battle seemed to be divided between fainting and hyperventilating in dread. But her sister's face stole the show for Leani. Her royal training in hiding her emotions shattered as she watched on in horror. Her understandings of warfare and combat uprooted by a force she couldn't combat or control, her past 30 years of work to be the second princess paling in the truth of what Leani was building. Because of the targets, each one, even those with the enchanted armor, was being ripped apart piece by deafening piece. No metal to stop the bullets, no spell to block the impacts, no nimbleness quick enough to dodge the attack. Clear weapons, safety's on, Jason ordered after the last round was fired, and each recruit had fired the 60 rounds at their target. Leani smiled politely at her sister, hiding her feelings perfectly as she had become accustomed to the display of devastation her army's weapons bring. So, Crown Princess Jalum, is our starting construction of this army sufficient to meet your requirements for the war? The Crown Princess forces a calm smile. Yeah, your fighting force is certainly impressive. Well, it is not over yet. Please watch carefully as Jason demonstrates the trump card of the army, Leani says with a polite smile before nodding to Jason. Grenadiers ready. 1 round. Jason ordered as 5 of the recruits loaded something into their larger weapons. Fire! The 5 recruits' weapons let out a soft tonk sound before the far end of the firing range exploded in 5 small plumes of dust as Jason turned to the audience. That was the M203 explosive spell launcher. It fires a 1.574-inch projectile to a max range of 437 yards and has an effective kill zone of 196.85 inches. 1 in every 5 of our soldiers will be equipped with this to help deal with enemy monsters and creatures. Leani turns and looks at her sister like she didn't just show her the end of chivalry, and smiles politely. Crown Princess, this completes our demonstration. You are welcome to rest here a bit while your knights wake up. she says with a wave to the escort, having all passed out in fear or shock, some still awake but catatonic in the thoughts of fighting her army. Although this marks the end of Volume 1, we're excited to share some great news. For all Leani's Rangers fans, a new author, U/P Philip X2, has received permission from U/Shadeskira to continue the story. Starting in the next few weeks, we'll be releasing weekly chapters right here on this channel. Don't miss out. Be sure to follow the playlist and subscribe so you'll be notified as soon as the next exciting chapters become available.